Hello? Shall we convene? All right. Again, loving the sweaters. Oh, great. All right. Let us call this meeting to order. Today we're going to have a recap work session and recommendation, and then an informal presentation of the transportation system plan, which is underway. And in the room is Commissioners Alvarado, Spivak, Vice Chair Thompson, myself, Chair Routh, Commissioner Pollock, and Commissioner Brannon, and I believe online is Commissioner Ames. Hi. Right.
Hi.
And let's start off with any items of interest. Oh, and Vice Chair O'Mara has just brought in. Okay. Well, seeing none, let's go straight to the director's report. Director Diefendorfer, please take us away.
Sure. Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chairs, Commissioners. Patricia Diefendorfer for the record, Chief Planner, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. Just wanted to provide a few little updates, not too much to update on today. I think because there was some interest at the last meeting, wanted to provide a reminder here that November 10th is the end of the comment period or the close of the comment period for two projects for which there are discussion drafts out currently. That's the Economic Opportunities Analysis and the Columbia Corridor Industrial Lands Project. So for those who may be listening and are interested in that, want to make sure you're aware of those deadlines. Also wanted to make sure the Commission is aware that there is one meeting on the books for November, but we don't have any items for that meeting. So the November meeting is going to be canceled. And we will be having, in December and January, as soon as we come back after the November, we will be having very robust agendas and schedule. And that also includes a third meeting having been added to January, if you hadn't noticed that on the tentative agenda. And that was kind of done in order to sequence the big projects that are coming to Commission and make sure that we don't have too many, gaps in the schedule and meeting certain timelines, project timelines. So the tentative agenda is online and it is up to date. So please do review the tentative agenda when you have a chance. And it is updated regularly in consultation with the officers. And I think finally, just want to kind of put on the radar for future of the Commission that elections happen Elections of the officers happen at the first meeting of the year. And so just kind of letting everyone know that that is something that will be coming up in the beginning of the year. And I'll be sort of getting in touch with the officers and starting some conversations. But we want to just make sure that if there's anyone interested in any of the officer positions, obviously that they start to communicate that and let the chair and the others of us know so that we can ensure that we are prepared for the elections. So I think those are all the updates that I have right now, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Director Diefendorfer. Any questions? Oh, great. Okay. Seeing none, let's go back to item of interest. Vice Chair O'Mara.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair O'Mara. For the record, sorry I missed this part of the agenda. Was a DRAC appointment to update provided?
Nope.
I am so sorry. That is negligence on my part.
Oh, no problem. I've got my notes here ready to
Please-
share.
Please do share.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the DRAC appointees went before the Homelessness and Housing Committee last week on the 21st and unanimous approval. And then tomorrow is the full council vote for those appointees. So moving forward as the Planning Commission representative to DRAC, but still not official. One more step. Thank you.
Congratulations to you, Vice Chair O'Meara. And I'm sure the commission's very happy to have you as a representative on the DRAC.
Indeed, thank you for serving. Let us go to our consent agenda, which is a whopping one item of minutes from the October 14th meeting. Could I have someone motion to approve the consent agenda?
I motion to approve.
All right, Commissioner Pollock, a second.
A second.
Commissioner Brandon seconds. Can we get a raise of hands? Aye. All right, and unanimous approval. Woo. All right, and now on to 4 minutes ahead of schedule. Let's go to the Regulatory Improvement Code Amendment Project, or Package 11, and would love, thank you very much, Sandra Wood, JP McNeil, and Shannon Buno. And before we begin, does anyone have any disclosures? Awesome. Okay, great. Sandra, please take us away.
Yes, I will. Great. Good afternoon, commissioners. It's nice to see you all today, especially Commissioner Brannon, who had difficulty communicating the last time because of our audio. So it's so nice to see you here today. We are here for the third time to talk about the Regulatory Improvement Code Amendment Package number 11. As Chair Routh introduced us, my name is Sandra Wood, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. I'm the Code Development Manager, and with me is a couple of teammates, JP McNeil, who is the Project Manager, and Shannon Buno, who's our Code Editor. As I said, this was the third time we're talking about this project. You had a hearing on September 23rd, and we closed the record at that time. October 14th, you had a work session, and you passed 5 amendments. I think it's 5 amendments, yep. And there was a motion for amendment number 6 that is still on the table. We tabled it for this discussion. And then there's so we'll need to dispense with amendment number 6, and then there's a 7th amendment on the table also. We published a memo to the commission on Friday, October 24th. That's available online on the Planning Commission's website for this project, if members of the public want to follow along. What we were thinking, what we have on the memo is amendment number 6 and 7, but we also have some questions that we were answering for commissioners and some things that came up during your last work session. So we thought we'd start there, actually, because one of the questions that we were answering is about mechanical equipment. The other one's about outdoor shelters, and that might inform your vote for amendment number 6. So starting in reverse order than how we put it in the memo. And I think with that, I'll pass it off to JP, and you can start discussing that.
All right, we're on. Okay, thank you, Sandra. So I'm JP McNeil, planner with BPS. As Sandra said, I will walk us through sort of where we left off with the amendments and answer or bring up some of the questions that were asked, some responses that we have to that. And so let me just I'm going to pull up. That is weird. Very strange. Stop sharing.
I don't think we need it for the questions,
Okay.
no?
I was going to pull it up, but okay.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Oh, actually, I do want it. I apologize. Get this pulled up. All right. So I want to walk us through, start with amendment number 6, which was the outdoor shelter amendment. And so just walk through where we left off on the amendment. So as Sandra, I think you mentioned that the motion was made, it was seconded and tabled, but and that it was an amendment that would lower the number of outdoor shelter units in the commercial zones from, based on the staff proposal, it'd be differ from the staff proposal in the proposed draft. So as a quick refresher, here is what was allowed in the, okay, I guess, sorry, it's the wrong table. I apologize. I apologize. So the allowance that we're changing, was, there's a proposal in MP 14 that would increase the number of outdoor shelters in the commercial zones, the CI2 and the EX zone from 60 to 200 units. And so that was the proposal in the proposed draft. And the idea on the table with the amendment would be to change it so that the in the commercial zones, rather than going up to 200 units, the proposal is to lower that to 100 units. So commercial zones would go from 60 units allowed to 100. And then we pulled out the EX zone, and that would be to allow for 200, continue to allow 200 units in the EX zone. And so, yes, and so that is what the amendment is. So what this accomplishes is that by pulling out the commercial zones and bringing that to 100 units, it means that we would cap the Multnomah Safe Rest Village at 100 units, which is the what's on the ground there, and it would still allow for there to be up to 200 units at the Clinton Triangle Safe Rest Village, which has 160 units now, so they'd still have room to grow. And so that was sort of, we're trying to accommodate both of those things with this amendment. And so that is what is the amendment on the table at the last work session. So any questions about that?
And maybe I can draw your attention to some of the answers you provided in the memo about the conditions of approval and the difference between a conditional use review and a good neighbor agreement. Do you want to cover that?
Yeah, I'm
too?
sorry. I was a little out of it. I've been out of town for a week, and today's my first day back, and I'm just a little bit out of it today. So
We're
yeah.
very glad to have you.
Okay, good. Thank you. I'm glad to be here, and I'm just going to take a deep breath. So yes, I was looking at the wrong side of my notes. So the memo, it had a response to the questions about conditional uses for outdoor shelters and how those conditions compare to the Good Neighbor Agreement and what the requirements of a Good Neighbor Agreement would be. And so we looked at some conditional uses. Since there have been no conditional uses for outdoor shelters, all of the outdoor shelters that are in place now are under the housing emergency that's been in place since 2015. So there have been no conditional uses, conditional use approvals for outdoor shelters. So there are no conditions of approval to look at. But so what we did was we pulled out some similar types of uses that have had conditional use approvals and looked at some of those conditions. So we looked at, there's group living and schools. And so what we found were that many of the conditions were site-specific, and so it was pretty hard to extrapolate sort of universal conditions of approval that might apply to outdoor shelters. But there were some of the conditions, some examples where there was some that required some sort of good neighbor agreement. There's requirements for shielding of lights. And then for some of the group living ones, the larger group livings had requirements for staffing or limitations on the number of residents that would be allowed with a group living use. So the one other thing with the conditions of approval with the condition land use review is that they are they're binding, and those are enforced by the city based on complaints. And so then we also looked at the good neighbor agreements that, if you recall, there is an existing good neighbor agreement for the Multnomah Village Safe Rest Village. And so we went through that a little bit more deeper, and found that it's a more comprehensive document. It covers many more potential areas of conflict. It establishes some communication channels, sets out clear expectations for the shelter operators and for Portland Solutions, the city office that oversees the Safe Rest Villages. And you can look at the memo. There's a list of sort of all of the comprehensive things that it addresses. But so it's a more thorough, comprehensive document, but the key distinction is that the Good Neighbor Agreement, it's not legally binding. And so there's even a clause to that effect in the Good Neighbor Agreement that says this is not a legally binding document, and it's not meant to be. So there's sort of the I guess the con of the Good Neighbor Agreement. While it's more comprehensive, there's no actual legally enforcement mechanism. But again, for the detail on that, you can see the memo, it lists off all those things. But I think, yeah, the big, like I said, the distinction is really the legal enforceability of conditions of approval versus the good neighbor agreement. Are there any questions on that?
I'm not seeing anything. No.
Okay,
So I think we can pass that to, since there is a motion on the table, we can pass it to you, Chair Routh, to,
And the motion is in its current form, correct? That which we tabled is the current.
yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sorry about that. Patricia Diefendorfer for the record. When you say current form, you
We
mean,
tabled it, so I just wanted to make
Yes.
sure it was in that form which we tabled, which we can now pick up.
right, it's the,
it's what's
okay,
on the
it's-
screen.
Great.
it's what's on the screen. Okay, yeah. I just wanted to make sure we weren't confused that it was the original recommendation.
No, I was saying like that
Okay.
which we tabled.
Perfect.
I want to make sure it is in that form which is before us.
Sure, perfect.
Correct,
Thank you.
which is what is on the screen for clarity.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Okay, so we were in our last episode, we were in discussion. So what further discussion points does anyone have? Commissioner Pollak?
Commissioner Pollock, for the record, it's more of a question really. Does the amendment in its current form, to the best of your guys' knowledge, prevent any planned expansion for other outdoor shelters in C zones, or is that not really something you're considering at this time?
Well, the only outdoor shelter in a C zone that is bumping up against that 100 is the Multnomah Safe Rest Village. Multnomah Safe Rest Village is the largest in a commercial zone. So the others that are in commercial zones, most of them are actually some of the smaller, not operated by the city zones. Yeah, this is helpful. Let me just double check. Yes.
I think that's in your memo too. We can show.
Not, I don't,
The table is,
not this, that's what I was looking, oh.
Oh,
silly me.
sorry.
No,
No.
that's what I was
No,
looking
you're-
for
no.
earlier. Oh, yeah.
no, it's the other table.
Oh, yes. Yes, this table's not in there. And so for C zones, there's another one, CM3 that has 70 units, could go up to 100. CX zones are 38 and 55, so there's room to grow for all of those commercial other ones. And then, yeah, there's several that are in the not city operated that are much smaller, like 12, 29, 39.
So this doesn't hamper any potential
They,
realistic growth?
they could all grow to 100.
All right,
Based
gotcha.
on what this zoning code is, not other. Yes.
All right, thank you.
Just to clarify, though, that it does pull out the EX zone from
Yes.
amongst the other commercial zones and retains the 200 units, the ability to go up to 200 units in the EX zone, which is where some of the other larger
Right,
city-operated or publicly operated
right. But
safe rest villages are.
the EX is not, it's an employment zone, so that we're, for the commercial zones, they could all go up to 100.
Great, thank you. Other questions or thoughts? Commissioner Spivak?
I had tossed out at the end of our last discussion the idea of a setback, and staff shared some ideas on that, and we basically realized that that probably was not a good approach because the outdoor shelter zones, outdoor shelter rules apply across many different zones. And if there's a desire for a particular parcel to have a larger setback, that's probably more appropriate to handle through a good neighbor agreement and just work it out where the actual shelters are located. And the particular site, the Multnomah Village site, there are some shelters, would be within the setback. They're not too far beyond 5 foot. Abutting uses, though, staff can correct me on this if I'm not, are not used as homes right now. They're used as other purposes.
Great. Thank you. Others? Commissioner Alvarado?
Yeah, leaving the legal options off the table for a good neighbor agreement, what are some of the ways in which the city addresses if, in the event that a good neighbor agreement is not being enforced well or it's being enforced poorly? Is there any action that the city takes, or is there any kind of way to make sure it's not just a document, not to say that there's any, but just in the event that that would happen?
The good neighbor agreement does, the way it is addressed in the good neighbor agreement is that there are options for mediation and arbitration. So if there is something that's a conflict that can't be addressed between the city and the neighborhood or whoever, any of the parties, they have the option to take it to starting with mediation and then to arbitration. So there is a way to escalate it, but it's, again, it's not legally binding.
But the city, just to clarify also, and what we have in a memo, is that the Good Neighbor Agreements, the city, Portland Solutions, our colleagues that were here last time, are part of the Good Neighbor Agreement. So it's not just between the operators and the neighborhood. It's between, and in the case of Multnomah Village, it's between Portland Solutions, the Joint Office of Homeless Services, the Multnomah Neighborhood Association, the operator, and the West Hills Christian School, which is nearby.
Commissioner Spivak?
I guess a question for staff is, would does Portland Solutions feel that if they had the ability to do more than 100, house more than 100 people on the site, that they would, and they could do so, I think it's 3.5 acres, that they could do so aligned with the Good Neighbor Agreement?
The Good Neighborhood Agreement, actually, in that Good Neighborhood Agreement, it states that the maximum number of outdoor shelter units on that site is 100, and if they plan to expand beyond 100, then they would have to work with the other parties to, I think it says, to figure out the next steps. So it's kind of wishy-washy, but it says that they can only go up to 100.
But at this point, they have no plans of expanding
Right.
it, is what they told us, I think, here on the dais, but they've told us that privately, too.
Right.
Trying to figure out what staff's recommendation is on this. It came to us at 200. I'm trying to figure out if this is okay, we didn't need to go that high, or they would like to have the option to go that high, based on renegotiating, Good Neighbor Agreement and the size of the parcel.
Commissioners, if I could just add, I think we heard when Portland Solutions was here last time, while they don't have any concrete plans to have more units there, we did hear about the economies of scale and the benefits of being able to, accommodate more people on individual sites, the difficulty of finding sites for this use. So I think as we left it last time, what we said is staff's recommendation is the original staff, what was in the original proposal. There's a motion on the table, and we've tried to provide you with the information, that hopefully will inform your deliberations on the amendment. So the amendment is as proposed on the screen there, and I think we've found a way to at least make sure that some of the other shelters, particularly those that are in the EX zone, are still able to have that room to grow and to go up to 200 units. So I think we've provided all the information we can at this time.
Vice Chair O'Meara, for the record, sorry to jump in. So just as a reminder around CX zoning allows for mixed-use multifamily development, including affordable housing. The density of that affordable housing is determined by the site area, roughly, right? So for a site like the Multnomah Village, what would be, and this might be an unfair calc to throw at you, but the max density of an affordable housing project?
I think there's bonuses.
And that's fair if you can't do
There could
the
be,
calc now.
there's bonuses, there could be.
Correct,
I'll
yes.
just tell you what the base FAR is.
Thank you.
In the CM2 zone is 2.5 to 1. So the building could be, what did you said, 3 acres, so what's that, 120, so 130,000 square feet, so 260, I'm not great at math, 300 something, 1,000 square foot building. It's not units, it's the size of the building.
Pretty
But that's safe to assume that it would be accommodating 200 units or more potentially, depending on the square footage of those units.
3 acres is a very
It's a
big
very
site
big
for
site.
Portland.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, other questions? Thoughts?
I-
Okay,
I'm just saying, for reference, a block in downtown is about 40,000 square feet. So that's about an acre. So it's 3 downtown blocks is about the size. So you can imagine how much you can put on there. But 2.5 FAR is about 2.5 stories, right? If you build up the whole site, probably would go stacking. And what's the base height is 45 feet.
I just did some quick math. JP was pretty right on with the square footage. at 3 acres with the 2.5, that's about 325,000 square feet. If you just divide that by 1,000 square feet, assume the units are 1,000 square feet, that's 327 units that could be built on that site. Now, obviously, there's other, there's height limitations and there's other code requirements you have to comply with, but that's just a very rough estimate.
Thank you for that quick math. Appreciated.
Does everyone feel that they have enough information to be able to vote on this amendment? Okay. I think we're at roll call. Autumn, if you would.
Commissioner Alvarado? Commissioner Ames?
Aye.
Commissioner Brannon?
Aye.
Commissioner Knowles? Vice Chair O'Meara?
No.
Commissioner Pollock?
Yes.
Commissioner Spivak?
No?
Vice Chair Thompson?
No.
And Chair Routh?
And I'm very much looking forward to our transmittal letter where we get to talk about why that was a no for folks. So,
I think Autumn is just trying to figure out how the vote went, whether it was majority yes or majority no.
Mm-hmm.
6 yes, 3 no.
yep. Okay. Moving on.
Okay. And before we move on to the next amendment, I just want to mention one thing while we're still talking about the questions that were raised. We kind of skipped around because I was not on top of it at the beginning. One of the other questions that we mentioned in the memo provides some additional information on the detached mechanical equipment, the screening of that. It was an amendment, if you recall, you voted to adopt the amendment for TA 10 that will eliminate screening requirements for detached mechanical equipment located in residential setbacks. There's a question about data on code compliance cases related to noise from detached mechanical equipment. And since it passed, I won't get into it, but I just want to point out that there is a little bit more data information about that in the memo, and that we did meet with and talk to the city's noise control officer who enforces the noise code. So just a little point of info there. And so then the next staff proposed amendment that we'll talk about is amendment number 7, institutional buffering standards. And so if we could bring the memo back up on the screen. Thank you very much. So this is amendment number 7. And so this is a new amendment that fixes an unintended consequence that was created with the with item TA, is it the which? Oh, MP 12, and it was brought to our attention by PP&D staff. And so that item would create an allowance for interruptions in the required landscape buffer for an institutional use, so like a school, that's adjacent to a residential zone. The proposal removed a footnote in this table 120-8, note number 5. And what that means, what that does, that's a reference to an allowance for narrower landscape buffers for parking lots with an institutional use. So removing that footnote, it means that that institutional development wouldn't be able to use the less restrictive landscaping standard that's in Chapter 33-266, which is currently allowed. So in other words, parking lots for institutional uses would need to be set back 10 feet and have a 10-foot landscape buffer instead of the normal 5 feet from property lines which is what is allowed now. So we're proposing to put the deleted footnote back into under table 120-8 so that that 5-foot landscape buffer would continue to be allowed. Any questions on that?
Not seeing any.
We would appreciate a motion in a second.
Yeah, yep.
Then
Would someone like to move?
So moved.
Great. Would someone like a second?
Seconded.
Great. Commissioner Pollock, on a roll. Further discussion? If any? Okay, let's call the roll.
Is the vote for Amendment 7, Commissioner Alvarado? Commissioner Ames?
Aye.
Commissioner Brannon?
Yes.
Commissioner Knowles? Vice Chair O'Meara?
Yes.
Commissioner Pollock?
Yes.
Commissioner Spivak?
Yes?
Vice Chair Thompson?
Aye.
And Chair Routh?
Yes. All right,
The motion passes.
thank you. And on to the full deal.
All right, so for the recap 11 full recommendation, so let's just,
we're reviewing the slide.
reviewing, we're just
Recap the recap?
recap the recap, great. So we're going to review what we've, the proposals that, now that all 7 have been passed, just a reminder of what we've done here. The amendments, we amended the drive aisle graphic, just inserted a new figure there. We made a change to the, clarified that the environmental regulations that apply to plan districts are applicable in the right-of-way. Amendment 3 was to allow up to 1/3 of required landscaping areas to be covered. Amendment 4 was to delete the proposed amendment about the medium-sized entertainment venues. Amendment 5 was the screening for mechanical equipment amendment that we talked about a moment ago. Amendment 6 is the outdoor shelter amendment that you just voted on, and then Amendment 7 is the institutional buffering standards that we talked about. So those are the amendments with recap 11, and so this is our proposal. We propose that the Planning Commission recommend to City Council to adopt the project report, to amend Title 33 as per the proposed draft as amended, and to amend Title 32, which is the sign code, and as per the proposed draft.
Would someone like to propose that entire amendment? For that entire package?
I propose to adopt the entire package.
Great. Vice Chair Thompson?
I'll second.
Oh, great. Any additional discussion before we go to the roll call? Okay, let us go. Thank you.
Commissioner Alvarado? Commissioner Ames?
Aye.
Commissioner Brannon?
Yes.
Commissioner Knowles? Vice Chair O'Meara?
Yes.
Commissioner Pollock?
Yes.
Commissioner Spivak?
Yes?
Vice Chair Thompson?
Aye.
And Chair Routh?
Aye. Great. Thank you all. And now we get to talk about a transmittal letter. What are the, I think in this, we generally talk about like what are the, how would we like to characterize our conversation? What, if there is any future work that we heard that we didn't get to, that we touched on, that seems to, that we would like City Council to consider in future, giving back to us. What are our favorite things? And what a minority report I would really like to start including in a transmittal letter of when we disagreed, why we disagreed, and to memorialize that struggle a little bit. Mr. Thompson.
I can start with maybe an easier one, which is the noise-related topic that came up. Commissioner Spivak and I earlier this week met with Shannon and JP and the noise control officer. Is that, yeah? Okay, Paul. And it was a great conversation, but it pointed to some opportunities from Paul's perspective to better clue property owners into the issue of noise and mechanical units. He shared that the noise, there's a decibel noise limit at the property line that differs between day and night. And Eli and I were just talking about those noise limits, and they're quite low. But that is a requirement regardless of screening. So the screening, in his opinion, what is allowed in the from a screening standpoint isn't necessarily effective at mitigating noise, whether it's beyond the setback or in the setback. And so one of the ideas that came out of that was to potentially incorporate some information onto the city webpage around mechanical equipment, residential mechanical equipment improvement projects where there's a lot of like FAQ and requirements, and it help people understand that regardless of where they're putting their unit and whether or not they're screening it, there's a noise ordinance piece that comes into play. And then there was also discussion of maybe including on approval stamps from the city, a reminder about that. We had also discussed a third option, which was to require somebody like an acoustician go out and verify noise levels. And we, I think, jointly agreed that that might be placing too much of a cost burden on people that are trying to make energy efficiency improvements. And so I don't think that's necessarily the recommendation. But aside from what we've already adopted as a commission, it seems like there's an opportunity to maybe raise awareness around just mechanical noise in general. And I would, Commissioner Spivak, if you have thoughts on that, or whether we should include it or shouldn't, or anything to add.
I think that it would be good to have something, because we learned something from this process in the letter. But one thing I learned after that meeting, I looked up the most common heat pumps that Daikin Mitsubishi that I and other people install all the time, and they routinely would violate Portland's nighttime noise standard, even if 10 feet from the property line. So it feels like the noise standard is a lot stricter than the zoning code in practice. And as our Parliament Ordinance pointed out, landscaping does almost nothing to mitigate noise, and any barrier with slats in it, which they typically do, does almost nothing either. So I feel like perhaps we can help. It sounds like the noise code is they're working on a new project there, but I think that it would be, there's dueling public health issues going on here. One of them is that people need to sleep at night. I don't know when there are violations that were cited, how it could be the 60, 70 decibels. It could be much louder than what the people are putting to now. On the other hand, people need cooling, right, in a hot city. So I hope that as part of the noise code project, there's a little bit of maybe there needs to be adjusted a little bit just to acknowledge the reality that name brand common heat pump units are going to get more than 50 decibels on a property line, even if they're set back 5, 10, 15 feet from the line sometimes. And I should say, and it's happening all the time, and I'm not hearing anecdotally complaints about some of the newer units. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Brennan.
I would say also that to be a recommendation for that noise project to coordinate with the Portland Clean Energy Fund, who is responsible for funding many of those heat pump projects. And we're going to see increased installations for the foreseeable future. And so perhaps in those standards and those grants, because that is funding, it could be coordinated to perhaps find models that don't violate.
Great. Thank you. Love it. I'll go with a love. I'm grateful for the daycare amendments, because we have been talking about it a long time, and I really appreciate that we are you're responding to a grave need in the city. I think it's also just, I think it goes without saying, but let's say it anyway, that shelter is not housing, and that that our interest in, or at least my interest in putting forward shelter amendment is to get through, to help stabilize people onto permanently affordable housing. But we are under no, or at least I am under no illusion that that is solving the housing crisis. Commissioner Spivak.
Well, maybe a dissenting view on the Sears site. I feel like it is true that the Clinton site, which has 185 on it now, is sort of uniquely located with roads around it, right? The Sears site is huge. It's 3.5 acres. I feel like the west side is disproportionately unrepresented in shelter right now, looking at the table that was shared with us. And I feel like that site, with a new updated Good Neighbors Agreement, it could accommodate more than 100 people. And that is why I didn't like that amendment.
Great, thank you. Were there other reasons you?
Yeah, I will chime in and also second that. I did think about the impact to the Clinton Street site, and there are a lot of residential community members that live there. There are businesses. We didn't hear from them, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't have concerns. And so I felt that by excluding that, it was an unfair approach by carving out the Sears site, which is larger. I also disagree around the reality around shelter is that it is a form of temporary affordable housing. And for many folks, that's all that they have access to in the current environment. So part of my rationale was looking at it a bit comparably to what would we allow to be built on that site as housing otherwise. And I think that there, in my mind, it was a bit of a discrimination question. So that was my approach.
I'm seeing Vice Chair Thompson. Yeah, similarly, great. And I think part of, this is one, as Sandra says, I hear Sandra saying, a bite of the apple, that going forward, this is a recommendation that will then go before City Council committee and then before City Council. So this is a reason, a good use of our transmittal letter is to memorialize some of the struggles so that can continue. Because I was, on that amendment, I was not entirely sure that I was voting correctly. So, and I might disagree with myself.
Can I have a question? Were people clear on what that vote was? If you are, that's great. But if it was unclear whether voting for or against, then I've had that. I've messed up. I don't want to jump out, but.
Yeah. I understand. I'll just speak for myself. I understood what the amendment was. I just wasn't confident that I was making the right vote. And that's part of the struggle. Commissioner Knowles.
I'd like to include something I think we included in a prior communication, which is that the neighbors for that site, and frankly all the sites, deserve some predictability about what the city's policy is going to be around emergency housing, or is this the new normal, as you said a couple of meetings ago. So just flagging that issue for City Council, that this has become really just a rolling uncertainty around what our policies are.
Yeah, that lack of clarity exacerbates tension.
Yep.
Yep. Other thoughts?
I want to appreciate staff in the letter, as I think we should always do. I think recap can be like kind of in the weeds and not super exciting. We, of course, had the shelter item, which I think generated a lot more engagement and feedback and dialogue. But just in general, I think, staff as usual, has been really great in multi-meeting information, bringing in others like Portland Solutions to address our questions, and responding as typical. So thank you, and I hope we can pass along that appreciation in the letter.
Thank you. Yeah, recap is always just a grab bag. And it's like, it feels like we have to go very deep, very quickly, and then move on. And it's 60, this time it was 60 amendment. I think the last time it was 240. Like, it's a lot. So anything else before we transition? All right.
I just wanted to thank you all for the kind words for staff. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. Breathing.
Well, thank you very much, commissioners. This was fun to be with our new commissioners in this format. And we will let you get on with your agenda.
All right. Enjoy your evening. And now we will move on to the Transportation System Plan. And this is Eric Hesse and Francesca Jones from the Portland Bureau of Transportation. I'm going to absent myself very briefly, if I may.
Chair Routh, I'm just going to quickly say for the record that this is an informational briefing. This is an update from our colleagues at PBOT about the transportation system plan update and the process that they're going through. They're just wanting to let the commission know what they're learning as they're starting this process and what they've learned from their outreach so far. Thanks.
And just this Brian Ames for the record, I'm going to need to leave shortly to catch a flight home. So just wanted to make you aware I may leave mid-presentation.
Thank you, Commissioner Ames. You're lucky that we still have quorum without you. Okay.
Yeah, good.
We're going to take a moment to get this set up. Just one moment.
Correct now.
Good.
It'll take a second.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Francesca Jones. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a senior city planner at the Portland Bureau of Transportation, PBOT.
Hello, everyone. Eric Hesse. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the supervising planner for our policy and regional planning team at PBOT, which has primary responsibility for the transportation system plan and the regional transportation plan, which we'll be discussing tonight. Thanks for your time and attention.
Great. So the Transportation System Plan is the 20-year plan to guide investments and our policies for transportation in Portland. So today, we'll provide an intro to the TSP and Planning Commission's different roles for different plans that PBOT brings. We'll talk about the 2045 TSP update process, our financial review, which is our minimum financial threshold for the major capital projects list. We'll talk about the project audit, a quick overview of TSP projects we've accomplished since the last major TSP update in 2016. And then, excitingly, open some discussion about the interest planning commissioners have and would like to see captured in our vision, goals, and objectives for the future of our transportation system. So first, an intro to the TSP. The TSP is the 20-year plan to guide our transportation projects, programs, and policies and investments in Portland. It guides how and what we do in two key ways. One, our goals, policies, and classifications guide the maintenance, development, prioritization, and implementation of our transportation system, including the ways we manage our streets to function to their classifications. And it has our list of projects that best advance our goals and policies and fit into a financial forecast that would accommodate our population and employment 20 years into the future. The 2045 TSP update is considered a major TSP update, which means that we're updating all of these things as we extend the horizon year from 2035 to 2045. And the last time we adopted our major TSP update was in 2018 for our 2035 TSP. Or our major projects list was in 2016, initially there. So a technical way to think of the TSP is that it's part comprehensive plan, part public facilities plan. Some of the TSP includes comprehensive plan elements, including the goals and policies, the list of significant projects, transportation policies, street classifications, and master street plans. In fact, the bread and butter of the TSP is Chapter 9 of the comprehensive plan with reprinted with a TSP cover on it. The TSP also serves as the transportation element of the public facilities plan, which is part of the citywide systems plan. And so that's why you see that there. So some of the TSP is in the comp plan, and some of the TSP is more detailed than the comp plan. And that's because it also includes sub-policies and area-specific policies, for example. And the comp plan elements of the TSP include the goals and policies, including all of Chapter 9 of the comp plan. The projects included in the list of significant projects, our TSP calls it our major capital projects list. Street classification maps and street plan maps. The TSP also provides more detail than the comprehensive plan by including additional sub-policies and area-specific policies to support the comp plan implementation, additional supporting information about transportation system conditions, and it has our financial plan. Because you're a legislative body with purview over the comp plan, PBOT is required to bring our plans before you if they update the TSP, or so if they are a TSP update, or it will directly update any of the comp plan elements of the TSP, including the goals and policies, the major project list, which updates the list of significant projects in the comp plan, the street classifications, or master street plan maps. Also street vacations when we give up the right of way for something, and street renaming. We're required by the state of Oregon to have a TSP that supports statewide planning goals. And through the state's TPRs, the transportation planning rules, they tell us what needs to be in our TSP. And then Metro, doing an additional level of planning with our region in mind, also makes rules that our TSP has to be consistent with. We also have to be consistent with our own city comprehensive plan and working through public and political engagement process to update and maintain the TSP. This is altogether how we make sure transportation serves and supports our land use and the goals of our state, region, and city. It's a layered approach. The whole premise of all of this is to make sure we plan out how we're going to use the land we've got. in order to meet the needs of future generations, knowing that if we don't plan well, inequities get exacerbated and carbon emissions and safety get worse. So this is a look at just showing how local actions help meet state goals. Greenhouse gas reduction targets from the state are vehicle miles traveled targets, or VMT. And the state has a role there to set that greenhouse gas reduction goal. There's statewide transportation strategy work there. The region does metropolitan greenhouse reduction targets, and then the city really has the levers of land use, active transportation, parking and pricing, transit and transportation options, and those are pieces that you'll see us working on with our TSP. The state just updated the transportation planning rules in 2022 in a process known as Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Rulemaking, or CFAC for short. Apologies. I want to make sure all members of the public are up to speed with what we're talking about, so I know many of you are quite familiar with this. The rulemaking primarily focuses on Oregon's 8 most populated areas, requiring changes in transportation planning to ensure Oregonians have more transportation options to reduce single occupancy vehicle reliance. And the purpose of the CFAC rulemaking was to better align the state's transportation planning with its long-term climate pollution goal. So the rulemaking authority is the Department of Land Conservation and Development, or DLCD, and they added a number of requirements to TSPs that we've accounted for in our scope of work. The most important new requirement is that jurisdictions have to show projects lists that will result in no net new vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, per capita generated in the horizon year, so the year 2045, if there are applicable capacity expanding projects in our projects list. And that's a pretty big thing. So it's worth noting that it's because the state knows that it will result in greater safety and equity. It's necessary to help keep our important goods, our freight goods moving, and the services moving on our streets. There's less wear and tear on our transportation assets. It's better for human and environmental health, and it supports disaster and emergency response resilience.
Quick clarifying question. Is there a benchmark year for that 2045 VMT goal?
So we will be establishing what the baseline VMT is, and projecting out, and kind of we'll learn what that is as part of our process in the next phase of work.
Yeah, Metro will be helping us identify that from the 2023 Regional Transportation Plan, where they've got some baseline efforts, and then these are supposed to sync up with that as they demonstrate that these are all supporting their climate smart strategy, which is how in the previous slide, the metropolitan area demonstrates its compliance with the state's greenhouse gas targets. So you could sort of think of it as we don't have that number yet. Metro is still identifying it. We actually met with them last week to try to get that, because they need to provide that information to all the cities to which this applies. But we should have it shortly, we think. But I think essentially you can think of it as a 2023 base year, and you don't increase it by the end of what you plan for your next transportation system plan, is the concept. Thanks for asking.
So the TSP is actually a two-way street. It guides how we develop our plans to implement the policies adopted in the TSP, but we also learn so much from doing the additional community engagement and the technical analysis that we do when we look at a specific area or geography, or if we focus on an area or an issue or a mode. So these plans also inform future considerations that may help improve the policies in the TSP. So one example is that they often help us refine our street classifications, right? If we are doing a certain deep dive into an area of town, looking at Northwest Portland and Northwest in Motion, for example, we we learn more information, and that helps us when we go to make our TSP updates in the future. All of the plans that we do over time could identify projects needed in the transportation system, but not all of them do. Here's 14 plans that were adopted by City Council just since our last TSP update. Some of these plans are considered just implementation only. They don't have recommendations to change any of the comp plan elements of the TSP, aka the goals, policies, classifications, or major capital projects. But some of these plans both guide implementation of our TSP policies for certain geographies or modes and also help identify potential updates to the TSP. Examples here include the Columbia Lombard Mobility Corridor Plan, the 2040 Freight Plan, and Northwest in Motion, which recommended updates to the TSP. Specifically, the street classifications and list of major projects. 2040 Freight also included recommendations for the TSP freight policies, and all of these were just recommendations to consider in a future update, recognizing that the TSP is how we reconcile across potential trade-offs in recommendations that come from our variety of plans. And the TSP is how we consider the transportation system's performance as a whole. You have, however, seen a few plans that have TSP elements that you've taken legislative action on because these plans all had land use actions, which Oregon law authorizes Planning Commission to oversee. So because the TSP sets the overall framework for how we manage the transportation system and prioritize investments in conjunction with the city's overall growth vision enshrined in the comprehensive plan, the 2045 TSP update is also coming to you in your legislative capacity, advising City Council on its ultimate actions. We do a lot of planning. We're always looking into particular areas of the city. Maybe you're familiar with some of our In Motion plans, like North Portland In Motion. We're looking at how to improve corridors with specific challenges, like with the Columbia Lombard Mobility Corridor Plan. And we look deeply into specific modes through plans like 2040 Freight, even though freight isn't a mode, it's a system. But each plan is like adding some of the ingredients to a bowl for making chocolate chip cookies. Whether we're making one cookie or a dozen, we still have to measure the ingredients, preheat the oven, dirty a bowl, pan spoons. I did this recently. And all the things we still need to wash, dry, and put away later. So we don't just bake one cookie at a time. Similarly, some of our plans include recommendations for new or redefined major capital projects, street classification changes, or policies, but those are comprehensive plan elements of the TSP. So they have to go through a lot more work than just getting accepted or adopted by City Council. They have to go through a hearing at Planning Commission, and Planning Commission makes a recommendation to City Council, and Council has a hearing and makes a decision, and then it goes to the state for acknowledgement. So we have to write findings to say how we followed all the rules and consistencies we're required to follow, and we have a 30-day public appeals opportunity where the public can challenge us on those findings. So not only is it a lot of work to take every plan through the full legislative process, it makes our work better if we consider everything as a batch, because we get to make sure we're more comprehensive with our work, evaluating trade-offs and making recommendations that consider the needs of the transportation system as a whole. And so we try to do at least a technical update of the TSP every few years, where we consider bringing in the combined classification changes and projects, et cetera, that have been recommended in adopted City Council plans since the last TSP update took place. And we look at them fresh and contextually all together, and they go through the legislative process together. And here are some examples of adopted plans since our last TSP update. All of these might have elements we'd consider for integration into a future TSP update, even if some of the strategies could inform sub-policies. but not all of them include updates to comp plan elements of the TSP, like the projects or classifications. Okay, now because we typically batch, that might mean that some of a plan's recommendations won't be enforceable on developers until the plan's recommendations go through a full legislative process and a TSP update. It also means that these recommendations in adopted plans could change at different points in the TSP updates legislative process. Overall, the benefits to staff time efficiency and holistic transportation system consideration often outweigh the potential risks, especially when we have the legal obligation to update our financial plan when we're making many project changes, so that in itself takes a whole lot of steps and effort. So that's an introduction here of planning with transportation in general. So I'll hop forward to the TSP update process, but you will notice on this slide, I do have a couple of spots where I have questions breaks, but we're also open to taking some questions as you need. Okay. There are 3 phases to our 2045 Transportation System Plan process work plan. Right now, we're coming to the close of our groundwork phase. Next year will be our development phase, and the following year will be our refinement phase. So far this year, our project team has been working hard to assemble information about our transportation system, informing our work and meeting our new transportation planning rules or TPR requirements. We've accomplished a draft history of racism in Portland's transportation system for a new transportation planning rule requirement with our major equity analysis, engaged twice with the Comp Plan Community Involvement Committee. We developed a public and agency engagement plan, established a technical advisory committee or a TAC, established a community advisory committee or a CAC, of which Chair Routh is serving. We did a plan and policy review, did a robust engagement with our TAC, CAC, and public to inform the draft vision goals and objectives. And we're still refining those with our project team, and we will be having a deep dive on them with our community advisory committee at their next meeting. So this is also what we'll engage with you on today. And what we'll be seeking to engage with council committees on by the end of the year if we're lucky. The reason why we want to do this by the end of our groundwork phase is because we're going to need to put our vision, goals, and objectives to work for us in the development phase. We don't want to get into the refinement phase without your engagement now, because it's going to cause a lot more work to try and undo and redo the work of the development phase based on this work that we're doing now on the vision, goals, and objectives as the underpinning to it. So we'll be using the vision, goals, and objectives to review all of our TSP policies and make sure we refine them and fill in gaps to meet them. And we're going to use them to support our project evaluation, packaging, and prioritizing for the draft major capital projects list. And we'll have TAC and CAC workshops and broad public engagement to help us prepare for the refinement phase. And the refinement phase is about engaging Portlanders to iterate improvements to their TSP. And this is where we have the pre-legislative process and the formal legislative process for our TSP adoption, as I kind of discussed before. Oh yeah, I put on these pretty little things here. So that's where we're at, and those are engagement opportunities. The simplified version of what we've got to do looks something like this. We take the major projects from plans adopted since the last TSP, add projects already in the TSP, remove the projects we already did, layer on needs identified from an existing and future conditions analysis, and factor in project cost updates. And then that gives us a revised universe of projects, candidate projects for our major projects list, and they all go in a bucket. And meanwhile, we have to figure out how much we are reasonably likely to afford for our non-operations and maintenance projects in the next 20 years.
Francesca?
Yeah.
This is a very, very predictable question for me, but I will ask it now. For that list of steps, do you ever remove projects because they're no longer aligned with the city's goals, rather than just didn't get funded? It wasn't on the list originally. I just heard.
Sure. So I think we'll both evaluate the list and see if project needs still exist. Sometimes other things happened or the original intent of the project, something else has changed. So some projects will be moved for that reason. I think based on perhaps past discussions we've had here, you might be also thinking about projects sponsored by people other than the city. And the new rules do in fact provide a bit more requirement for the local cities where those projects occur to agree to do those. And particularly, Francesca mentioned earlier, there are some capacity expanding projects which then trigger that requirement around NodeNet VMT. We are looking at some projects by other partner sponsors that are in the RTP but now need to be brought into our TSP so that they can remain consistent with future RTPs. And we'll be having some discussion there. They actually go under enhanced review to evaluate what their induced demand would be and other impacts after evaluating other steps that could be taken in order to not maybe build the project. So that's some work we are planning to do, potentially both with ODOT and the port.
All right, I just mentioned needs from existing and future conditions. So real quick, what are needs from existing and future conditions? Essentially, they're a new inventory process requirement to tell us how complete our network is for different modes. So we'll take this data, layer it on top of the projects we already have in our TSP and the projects identified and planned since the last TSP, and that's going to help us figure out if we need to tweak or any existing project descriptions to or their scope to capture any additional needs, or if we might need to make new projects to meet needs that the inventory process had us identify. So it's really inventory process driven. And then we take that bucket and we put it through the prioritization process shown here as a Melita filter. And we sort the whole bucket of candidates through the project evaluation criteria reflecting the goals and vision we develop for our transportation system. And this piece happens in the development phase of the work here that we are on the precipice of. So we sort the whole bucket of candidates through the project evaluation criteria reflecting the goals and vision we develop for our transportation system. And once we've figured out what we can reasonably try to afford in the next 20 years, we'll be able to take all the projects and prioritize them so that we know what financially fits on our constrained list and what needs to go to our unconstrained list. More on this in a moment. And the unconstrained list is our important projects identified that would extend us beyond the reasonably expected funding projection. There are 2 steps to coming up with a constrained projects list. We're calling it a 2-step because it's a bit of a dance. It's also a bit of an art and a science. In the first step, we do more of the science part of the dance. We evaluate individual projects for their consistency with our TSP goals using criteria that meet statewide requirements. A little sneak peek of our TSP goals. We'll get here in a moment, actually. So this will create a robust body of information about our projects that will power the second step, which is the art of packaging up the right combination of projects that best balances benefits and burdens, demographic, geographic, and otherwise, applies a fiscally constrained dollar value, and that is internally prioritized by readiness for implementation, often in two buckets, a 1 to 10 year and an 11 to 20 year. Okay. So right now, I'll actually pass it on to Eric to go over the funding review piece here.
Great. So I know that as we present on this, there's often some confusion around this financially constrained or not. Some of you may be more familiar, but also for our audience, just sometimes the words feel a little flipped for themselves. So just briefly reiterate how this works. As Francesca was noting, we have this universe of all potential projects that we need to evaluate. And then we basically apply that financial threshold that I'll describe in a second here to do that. And then that's where it really helps to define how much we can afford. And that's what it is, financially constrained when you can afford it, because you're demonstrating financial constraint, which sounds a little bit weird because you might say I'm usually unconstrained when I can do a thing. So anyway, I just wanted to get that clearly defined for folks because it comes up a fair amount in this whole process and also in the regional transportation plan. And as Francesca well noted, I think that's part of the preliminary work that we're doing here. And so that's where that line drops there. And so this financial part is really what matters, because projects are required to be on that list of financially constrained projects in order to both be programmed in the Oregon Statewide Transportation Improvement Program, where often state or federal funds flow through there and can actually then get spent after coming out of our long-range plans. And then they also need to be on the TSP list in order to accept and frankly even apply for federal grants. There's some ways you can quickly do that, but generally they need to be there. And in order to do that, they also need to be in the regional transportation plan. They need to be in our TSP, and there needs to be consistency there. So the constraint list is pretty important in terms of us actually implementing projects down the way. And importantly, in these new rules, in addition to the state and federal funds, the new rule also says you need to only for non-operations and maintenance projects, but for things delivered through the city's capital improvement plans or CIPs, they need to be identified in this list as well. And so some of you familiar with the current 2035 TSP may note that we had financially constrained lists there too. I'll note that we actually did that voluntarily before state rules required that, because we thought it was good practice on the basis of the RTP, but it's now for reals, if you will. And so we're going to have to be even more attentive to that in terms of what we're putting on there. Recognizing, I'll also just note that sometimes the 20-year version of a need, say in a corridor, could get translated into one or more capital improvement projects on our sort of 5-year implementation list. And so, there's ways that those iterate, and we can translate artfully between them because things do evolve through the planning process. Some of these are longer range out ideas that we have not gone in and done design for in many cases. So I just wanted to explain that a little bit as well. So that's going to be a key area here. I also want to make sure that people realize that I did mention non-O&M projects importantly. So it doesn't mean that if you're not on the project list, it's never going to happen. There are a number of projects that don't need to be on the significant comprehensive plan list to be implemented through operations and maintenance. For example, we can do a number of implementation projects, and a significant amount of improvements in the transportation system also come in association with development, as I'm sure you're well familiar here. And so there's projects that can continue to be implemented beyond that. Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Has there been precedent, or to what extent has there potentially been precedent of a project? Because it's like the regional transportation plan with the constrained list is kind of like the one, right? That a lot of the grants and leveraged funding comes from. Have there been many cases in which a project circumvents a TSP process and goes onto the RTP constrained list?
There could be formal RTP amendment processes. In general, they would want that to be identified at minimum in an adopted plan. Generally, Metro would want that to be in a TSP. They also recognize that because these go in ongoing cycles, this batching that Francesca described also happens between the transportation system plan level and the regional transportation plan level. There is some opportunity to bring into compliance in a following TSP. what you do. So basically, it wouldn't be able to go through 2 cycles to not be reconciled, but there are some opportunities if it feels urgent to do so. But that's a pretty extensive process. It also then needs to demonstrate that it would be compliant with RTP requirements and other goals. And so Metro certainly discourages it if it can be avoided. Also briefly to Commissioner Spivak's question, that's that kind of reconciliation that would happen again for other projects that may have been in the RTP under previous rules, for example. Sometimes the rules even change, and then you go through a reconciliation process again. So, but I can't think of any discrete examples that the city has brought forward in that case. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I guess I'm mentioning just other things. Oh, please, Chair Alvarado.
Yeah, just curiosity. I'm curious if there's a weighted criteria or like for prioritization of projects based on those that level criteria. Are those weighted, or is there a rubric, and is that based on current council's values, or what's the decision making?
So, no, a good question. So they are not required to be weighted per se. That would be part of the process, perhaps determining if that felt important. But we would be planning, there are certain criteria that the transportation planning rules sort of suggest we need to be evaluating against, and then there's others that are community identified values. As you're saying, council, our public engagement process, this body's role as well. So I think that is discussion we'll have in future phases when we start to be doing that second phase of the 2-step dance that Francesca was describing. That's where some of those questions of weighting and packaging would probably best emerge. But that first phase where we're just evaluating against some criteria, that's what we would call sort of information gathering, so that we can then take a look at them and understand what these projects do in their individual pieces, how they relate to some other of their requirements, so we can then think about bundling them. Does that make sense? Great, thank you.
Oh, I have
Yes.
a question. So now that the city is in this, one public works, and are you going to be batching with other bureaus' capital plans and prioritizing those future things? Because it sounds like if they're not on this constrained list, you wouldn't be able to collaborate. So that's a new lens, right, of incorporating Water Bureau and Bureau of Environmental Services and those capital plans as well?
Yes, Commissioner Brandon, we're both engaged directly in that process and thinking about it through this lens, also including them in our technical advisory committee and making sure they're well aware of these new rules. I think the rules seem to apply particularly to transportation projects, so wouldn't say any water infrastructure project that wasn't part of, say, stormwater in a right-of-way project like that we're managing, we believe is where that line is drawn, but we certainly are wanting to bring that spirit forward in as many projects as it makes sense.
Dig one trench instead of 3
Right.
phases?
For example, yes. So yeah, definitely. And I'll note a little bit later on some other opportunity places where we're thinking about that being important. So thanks for bringing up that important dynamic. Great. Yeah, I think I mentioned other things being delivered through development, either as sort of requirements of the development itself or through system development charges, which have also funded significant improvements in the city historically. Great. So yes, so this is the funding review, and so also as part of the process and the requirements, this is what is termed part of the existing conditions analysis for the TSP, and ODOT guidelines for developing TSPs say that this is critical to understand this financial limitation of the study area early in the planning process before the development and assessment of the transportation projects, which is why we're delivering this information now before we go into the development phase. And it is intended to be a snapshot of existing revenue and expenditures, as well as a preliminary estimate of future funding that's available to implement projects included in the TSP. And it should be taking place before the needs and solutions development. Notably, this also does not include new revenues. This is existing revenues. And so, for example, if the political process during this next few years supports ideas for new transportation revenue sources, there has been some discussion with council, that would be able to be integrated into the TSP's overall funding program at the development phase and down even into through the refinement phase as we move through the legislative process. So this does not necessarily represent the high watermark of the process, but the beginning watermark, looking at existing and historical trends to provide an estimate. Great. And I'll also note that that of course could then potentially expand the capital list as we go through the process, and it's entirely possible people will see what is and isn't on that and might want more revenue. So we'll see how that plays out. And then finally, there are places in which it is both useful and at times necessary to be consistent with the regional transportation plans, financial assumptions, and and I'll note a place there where that shows up discreetly. So the reveal, so the number that was sitting at that line is 1.723 billion. So great, what does that mean? How do we contextualize that is probably a question in your mind. And so I can provide a little more context on that. I think before I do so, it's worth noting that between the last TSP and now these new rules to have the financial constraint, it also brought with it some of the same expectations of the regional transportation plan regarding whether you represent, if you will, base year revenue and costs, or if over the 20-year planning horizon, you represent year of expenditure cost estimates, which would then increase over inflationary rates, and also then on the revenue side as well. And so they're not perfectly apples to apples because we are developing this new number under that. So if you were to look in the current TSP, you would not see the same number I'm about to show you. So I just wanted to clarify that. We then applied those inflationary rates from RTP's guidance in order to come up with our best apples to apples comparison for context. And so, good news is it's actually pretty close and a little bit higher, even as we note that we are having challenges with funding transportation, but based on these projections, that's encouraging. At the same time, and I guess I want to context this just a little bit more, and then I'll point out to some of the remaining challenges that we're definitely going to be facing. Even as I'd note, this is not money in hand, right? This is if things continue, and we already know that things that were continuing for a while stopped continuing pretty fast recently, I'll just say. But if we were to contextualize this also, because this is just the number we're talking about is our capital investment available funding. It's not all revenue that we have and not all money that we will be spending. So if we wanted to think about this as a pie, which is the season soon here, then that 1.72 billion I described as about a quarter, roughly, of the overall expenditure that would include not just sort of physical asset maintenance, but all of the operations that actually make the Bureau go, right? All the programming, all of the staff, overhead, things like that. But just contextually, that's about how that splits out. And so then for the not as great news, and this is another area where we look to the RTP because it actually both requires us to apply some of this and provides the best guidance possible. And they in turn are using information and guidance from ODOT about how to do this through metropolitan planning areas around the state. So between the 2018 RTP and the 2023 RTP, there was a pretty extreme inflation, particularly in inputs to the transportation sector, even as others were experiencing this in day-to-day lives. Though some of that got worse during the pandemic, but even prior to then, we were experiencing significant constraints and on supply of steel and concrete and things like that. And so their recommendation, based on experience in the industry, was over that 5-year period to apply a 40% growth increase in the cost of projects. Revenues did not go up by that much in that period. So that is something we did to bring that up to a new 2023 base year. So that's going to be potentially impacting our purchasing power as we move forward. And so we are still kind of awaiting the latest updates to that for the next RTP, but for now we're going to use some of those bases. As we brought a number of projects into the regional system for the last 2023 RTP from our 2035 TSP, we had to apply some of these. So we do have some updated cost estimates for the projects that were on the regional system, and that's sort of what's defined in the RTP. It tends to be sort of the highest level classifications on our roadway system and our other modal networks. But there's a whole number of local projects that are not in there, and those would still need to go through the same cost estimate. And I want to note that then as we look out from the next planning horizon over 20 years, we'll need to apply additional inflationary pressure there as well. And that's what we're trying to refine and understand the most appropriate factor. But again, that will probably put some pinch into our purchasing power. And then finally, maybe a little bit rosier news around potential new revenues. I'm sure this body and others are aware of the TIF districts and the newly formed, and we are engaging with Prosper Portland around how best to be engaging with them in their process with their district community leadership committees. The map represents both the areas where these newly formed districts are, as well as calling out sort of up to amounts of potential funding for infrastructure that were identified in the TIF reports that accompanied the formation of the districts. Works last year. And so we recognize that a lot of these would be tied very much to development and localized in adjacent areas for their impact. But Commissioner Brannan, your previous point, this is a place where we both need to be thinking about needing to bring things, if PBOT is going to be delivering these transportation infrastructure improvements, a number of them are called out specifically as transportation, then we'll need to be integrating that into the TSP in appropriate ways. And similarly, we recognize this is probably a place where we have a lot of that integrated infrastructure improvement, and so where we'll want to leverage the unified CIP process, and we're definitely identifying this need through that flow as well. So thanks for raising that. But this is an area where maybe there's some more additional investment or a good example of that development-associated investment that we're hopeful to leverage.
Okay, our next slide is just the questions break.
We'll take a pause.
I've seen people scribbling madly. Who would like to start?
I have some questions. Thank you so much, Vice Chair O'Meara, for the record. Going back to the previous section on the project evaluation criteria, I saw under the sustainability, there was a reference to in climate-friendly area, and I was just curious, what does that mean? Are there established geographies throughout Portland that are deemed climate-friendly, and just what's the definition of that?
Great, no, thank you. And that's, should have perhaps have noted that. So the overall, the climate-friendly equitable communities rules define these new climate-friendly areas around the state. What's notable is that in the Portland metro area, because Metro was kind of well ahead of the other MPOs, metropolitan planning organizations, the rules basically sort of say, we already have an adopted plan, the others are coming back with, and so the metro centers count. And that's really what we're talking about there. And so rules apply in those areas. And in discussion with DLCD, we also said, great, well, we also have some town centers and other things we think would be appropriate that maybe aren't reflected there. Can we apply some similar thinking in that space, as well as some of the corridors that we've defined through the comprehensive plan as well. So if you really want to kind of think of it as the centers and corridors, that's what we'll be focusing on, even though technically the rules in some areas only apply to the regional metro identified centers. So. Thank you.
Vice Chair Thompson.
That was great. Thanks for the presentation, and also for sharing that you all are dessert people. I have a lot of questions around carbon emissions, and I think probably the best place to start is the vehicle miles traveled. Is that the only carbon-related metric, or is that the predominant one?
No, it's a good question. So as Francesca was noting, the statewide planning construct of around this right now that has the rules that particularly apply to what the TSP has to demonstrate, so if you will, a floor, is framed around vehicle miles traveled, and that reflects what she was laying out in that graphic, which was actually from the state, that sort of says the theory is the state and to some degree the feds are still focusing on fleet and fuel pieces. That's harder to control directly at a local city scale. And so that other list of things on the far right, thank you, Francesca, are some of the things that you would focus on that are more connected to eliminating the amount of driving that occurs or reducing the growth in how much vehicle miles are traveled. And so that's why they have said the MPO and the local targets are really focused around VMT. So again, that's the minimum floor requirement. We could, and we are working to coordinate with our next climate action plan update at the City of Portland, which we're looking to launch next year. I understand, sync through and make sure that our targets and goals connect with that, which would look more holistically at other sources of emissions, other greenhouse gas emissions per se, not VMT, which we recognize as a proxy in some ways. But so it's that idea that that's what we can most directly influence, and that I should also note that these regional and local, particularly the regional targets, DEQ and ODOT and Department of Energy work to update the targets so that they reflect that whatever the VMT reduction would be in combination with the state's ability to reduce emissions through energy, decarbonization, things like that, would all reach the statutory goals adopted in the state of Oregon.
Okay, I mean, I guess that sort of answers one of the questions, which was just looking at the state carbon emissions goals, which I think are relative to 1990, a 45% reduction by 2030 and a 75% reduction by 2050. In Portland, that number is 80% by 2050. Presumably, there's some pie chart that says how much of that the transportation sector owns. And so I wanted to understand if the VMT target, when we're saying that we're trying to reduce or we're trying to have no new VMT per capita in 2045 relative to a 2023 base year. That doesn't seem to be making progress toward a climate goal unless I'm wildly misunderstanding something.
I think you're not wildly misunderstanding, and I think that's why I'm saying this is, if you will, a floor. And what we also have to be doing with the TSP is demonstrating that we are likely to make progress on a suite of regional set of targets that the Climate Smart strategy that Metro has adopted and is operating under, and that the RTP has to demonstrate compliance to every cycle. That those we need to that the VMT target is not the only way we demonstrate that, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I would agree with you that a no net zero per capita piece does not directly demonstrate that the city of Portland would reach the regional target for that, because for that same year, it's I believe a 35% per capita VMT reduction that the RTP has to demonstrate. And so I anticipate that we might have, and that's why I mentioned also the climate action plan, and I'm trying to sync that up as best we can, knowing they're starting a little later than we are. That would be where we would want to reflect both City of Portland adopted goals and how we're on track to meet those, as well as then probably going above that floor to demonstrate what the city's leadership looks like in that space. But I think you're interpreting it correctly that if you only got to zero, it wasn't going to get us to the reductions that we needed. But at a minimum, the rules did not establish local city targets on that basis. They did it at a regional scale relative to that state responsibility and MPO responsibility.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
I mean, that's a little frightening at the state scale from my standpoint, but
Can
anyway.
I jump in with a clarification before you just?
Sure, I know this is
What are
complicated.
vehicles?
Apologies.
Like, is my bike a vehicle? Is a car a vehicle? Is an EV? Is a bus a vehicle? Could you just let me know what? Because I realize I don't know which of those are counted when you say VMT.
Yes. So another good question. So and it would be great to have the state come perhaps and explain this at some point too as we're going into the process. But so the VMT, I should also note that we're referring to here is household-based VMT. And so, and it's light-duty vehicle only for those targets.
Is my e-bike a light-duty vehicle?
No.
Okay.
It's motor vehicles.
So it's motor vehicle, but it includes ones powered by gas or electricity?
It would. So yes. But again, the targets we're demonstrating are on the amount they drive, not their actual energy
So
efficiency.
in theory, like you could have flat VMT and have, if the percentage of electric vehicles in the fleet and they're getting electricity from good renewable sources, in theory, you could have a reduction. I'm not saying it would, but.
Right. And that's where the rules also require the state to update those assumptions and measure their progress. Next year, ODOT is providing the latest progress report on implementation of the statewide transportation strategy that was referenced. So again, if you will, the whole construct says, great, how much are we really getting through fleet and fuel transition, and how much do we have to then make up for locally with how much we're driving is fundamentally the construct. And that we try to keep getting a sense of how efficient the fleet, how efficient is it to be driving, and how much less of it do we need to do to get there.
Okay, well, I know others have some questions, so I'll wrap it up. But understanding it's still very early stages and there's a lot of coordination to be done with Climate Action Plan and others, I'm curious if there's been any discussion around including alongside actual dollar costs, like money, a carbon cost accounting, and using that as a primary tool for making decisions and prioritizing those projects that will give us the biggest benefit from a carbon standpoint.
Thank you. We haven't had formal discussions about that, to be frank. I also, I guess, would note many of our projects are supporting biking and walking and other low carbon modes is a lot of what we're really trying to build out and what the rules require us to focus on building out. Though there is the exception of maybe a few capacity expanding projects as well that need that enhanced review to understand what their impacts might be and that then need to be not increasing the overall VMT of the systems approach. So I think we could think about that. I also don't know how deterministic it would be among those project types, but we are, as a city, trying to better understand the cost of both embodied carbon and sort of that other social cost of carbon. I should also note that currently the statewide transportation strategy assumes that that's occurring at a statewide level during this planning period. And so that is actually already embedded within that baseline amount that sets the targets that we were just discussing. And so we may also have, we'd have to demonstrate that we're doing something above and beyond that to get credit under the system as well, which is a little bit different than what you're describing, but just to note that that would be something else to disentangle as we perhaps use that as a prioritization factor.
So a couple questions.
Please.
Does the RTP include strategies like trying to develop a more heavily electric-powered fleet of vehicles? Or is that not a project in terms of the RTP?
I do believe that TriMet, for example, has included decarbonization of their fleet as some projects, especially if they want to be using federal funding. So that's often the nexus. There has been some discussion within that, and I believe that it should be a focus of this next. Metro is also planning as part of the next 2028 RTP process, which is kicking off next year, a refresh of the climate smart strategy, recognizing that we perhaps haven't made as much progress, and then in light of some recent changes with federal support, we were looking to reevaluate that. So I think that's where you may see some additional thinking about that, Commissioner.
Okay. And then in the RTP, there are sort of categories of projects. I mean, there's transit, there's bike facilities, there's freight corridors. There's enough of those categories of projects in place that you can measure the effectiveness of those projects in addressing carbon emissions. But do you do that as part of this RTP process?
So to my understanding, they have evaluated the project list as a whole to generate estimates of both vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions, but I do not believe they have been able to do that individually at a project level, and which takes quite a lot to run. I think that there's a sense of what is more and less impactful, to your point around the sort of the categories and those types of things, and so a lot of project evaluation criteria sort of embed that, but it's different than them calculating exact, this bike project's gonna reduce X percent versus Y percent in this bike project, for example.
Well, but I'm more interested in sort of generically,
yes.
If investments in transit, because commute patterns have changed and costs have changed and all kinds of other things, if they're not being effective in helping to meet our carbon emission reduction goals, then my question would be, why would we continue to do those things?
I understand.
So I'm interested in how the RTP extracts that.
Yeah, I'm going to probably defer to Metro to talk about how they plan to update the RTP and that part of the strategy. We did do in 2014, the original Climate Smart strategy, and I happened to be working at TriMet on the time and worked on that project. Did evaluate the literature, draw information from national transit data sets and elsewhere to model that and estimate that in conjunction with ODOT and Metro. I imagine perhaps there might be a repeat of that, but I'm not sure what, they actually haven't fully committed to the scope of work there, but that would be where I would point to.
Okay. And just one other question, if I may, regarding sort of how we link up with regional transportation discussions and investments. We have a lot of projects in the city of Portland, I imagine, that have really important regional consequences.
Yeah.
So what's that interface like? How do we sync up in a way that we're supportive of the region and they're supportive of us?
Yeah. In many ways, that is the TSP to RTP back and forth process is really the fundamental, I think, answer to that. And then, for example, as we have funding measure conversations regionally. We talk about what the most important priorities would be to advance as we do other funding processes where we have some of the regional flexible funds passed down from the federal government through the state to the region. We then work to determine what we think is most advancing the RTP goals and objectives, and the criteria try to evaluate that. And we put project priorities there as well. So, and yes, Francesca.
And generally, the region identifies the regional network, and any place where our projects overlap with their regional network, they are eligible to be submitted to the RTP. So.
Yeah, and I think maybe one other component we haven't described briefly in the RTP is they also sort of help to define where there's gaps and needs in the system, and that complements with our work on the local system. And so that's the other sort of syncing that occurs is where does that need to be, and we're expected to prioritize investments there. Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, Vice Chair O'Meara.
Thank you. I really appreciated the overview of the funding because I am constantly curious about why transportation projects seem to always be needing funding when they're in the visioning stage and then beyond, right? And that really helped me understand that even to be eligible for funding, you have to demonstrate that cost constrainment. You mentioned that SDCs are a significant source of revenue. I'm wondering, with the SDC pause on new residential development over the next 3 years, have there been projections about how that specific pause will implement PBOT revenue or any of these projects?
So we're in the process of updating the TSDC program right now and working in parallel closely with them. A reminder, this is a 20-year forecast, and so it's not all of that. And yes, it will impact those projections, and we are incorporating that into that estimate.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for bringing this to us so early. I appreciate that. I don't think I have a question, but I've got a request to include. Commissioner Knowles has been doing these plans longer than I have, but I've been doing it for a while. And it feels like when one gets, like I was in 2020, and that's the plan looking forward, well, it was amended to look forward to 2035. And it says by 2035, we will do this, this, and this. And it's very optimistic, I think. Like we'll have reduced fatalities, we'll have this 70% of trips by not by cars with a certain mode split. And then the next time you do the update is in 2025 or here right now. And we don't know how we're doing on those things, right? We're not having to look to see whether are we actually making headway? Are we being aggressive enough or not? So my request is that, and this happens with climate plans too, is that there get a couple pages in the document where you just, on each list, when each plan was done, the year it was adopted, what was the existing conditions then, in terms of just a few, those would be some examples of some of the criteria. And then what is the performance measure that plans are trying to achieve? So it's looking, usually they're looking 20 years out. And so maybe on the left side, there's like what is today, on the right side is what the plan hopes to be done. And then a list of bullet points of what are the strategies that we tried between then and the next plan update. And then do the next plan update, same thing, just down the page. So for each time we've updated this plan, I want to see the beginning, existing conditions, and what at that plan time we thought it was going to be like at some point in the future. Because I suspect what's going to happen is we're going to see all these things we do, and then the starting point is the same again and again on mode split. If that's the case, then it's indicating we should learn from this that maybe we're being too timid. Or maybe we don't have enough money. I'm not sure what it is, but I guess I want to have that feedback loop in these sort of planning documents. So, because it's really hard to compare when you set the plan in 1 year and you update, and you're looking 30 years out, and you update it 5 years later, 10 later. You're always looking 35 years, always looking good 35 years out, or 20 years out. It's always looking good there. But if we're just doing the same starting point every time, that should give us. We should see that in the document and acknowledge it and be real about it. So, do you think we can do that in this?
Appreciate that request. I will say we'll do our best to provide that information. I think part of what we'd like to do, frankly, better in this version is be able to more closely monitor over periods, ideally from actual data, how the performance is.
Oh, I want the actual data. I want, because every time you do a plan, you always get actual data.
Well,
so you know what the mode split is at each one of these 5-year points. So I want to see that mode split on one page, if that's possible.
Yeah. So I will just note, because this is something I want as well, that a number of those measures were defined as a modeled construct. And so because some of what was asked or required is done in a model, but we can't predict the future. And so what we're trying to do, and frankly, it's a bit of a frustration that we have, is that some of those that we wanted to be being able to monitor are really modeled measures. And so what I think, and the other challenge is to get actually the type of data we want on the transportation system. It can be quite difficult to get specific and granular information. That said, some of the mode share targets, things like that, we can report on. And so certainly we can do that. I just want to be frank that we're not going to have a perfect line item. What we're going to probably do is bring forward measures that we think we could better monitor over time so we can do that more effectively and consistently.
Are there some measures that you have monitored once every 5 years?
Yeah, and for example, Vision Zero, you mentioned, we have annual reports on that in part because that data is sadly more available than it is to say, what is everybody doing all the time, every day around the system?
Yes, maybe picking out some of the data. Do you know mode share?
I can share that we were able to point to the census there in terms of particularly the commute mode share. That's really what the census tracks, and that has flatlined across the mode shift goals that we have there.
So I'm just thinking maybe cherry picking the data points where you actually have been getting data at each 5-year plan start date. That would be great.
Yeah, no, that's where we'll step in toward it, do what we can, and then hopefully be able to do that more consistently, because I agree that would be most valuable.
Before we move on? Yes, sorry. Vice Chair.
One just quick clarification and one more question. On the clarification front, when I was suggesting exploring some kind of carbon cost, I think the reaction was that a lot of the projects are focused around bike and pedestrian anyway. But my point with that was trying to invest where we can see the most value from a carbon standpoint. So it's either a positive number or a negative number. But I feel like that could be a helpful decision-making tool. So I just wanted to clarify that. And then the question was about how this process will interface with the Sustainability and Climate Commission, if that's understood at all yet.
Great. I think we're still, the second part first, I think still exactly figuring that out, though, are working with the Chief Sustainability Officer of the city around those roles. We certainly also envision, for example, that the Climate, Land Use and Resilience Committee on Council has some land use purview and like to bring that to them if we can, but it's been challenging to get on their agenda so far. So I think we intend to do that. I guess would want to just note in this forum that there is the state legislative role that you all formally play over this as a land use action. We think it would be more informative to engage with the commission, but we are sort of also trying not to confuse formal authorities in that space, though certainly they are strongly advisory to the city and its process around those types of plans, and so we intend to bring information through there, but that we had envisioned the legislative process would move through this body instead.
We do have another questions break opportunity in a minute.
There is more, sorry.
Okay, I'll just go through a few slides here. The purpose of, this is about our capital project audit, and the purpose of it, I like to say, is a boring one, because this is really just, it's like maybe over the top of the title of it even, we just needed to list what we need to remove from the TSP before we start applying criteria and prioritizing everything else, because we get to make room in our financial plan for new projects by removing the things that we've done. I guess I wanted to acknowledge here Amanda Deering is here with us. And Amanda Deering is our senior transportation planner and transportation modeler who supported this work. The 2035 TSP major capital projects list was adopted in June 2016 and updated in March 2020 to account for project amendments and additions from subsequent planning processes. And this review may generally be considered the PBOT TSP major capital projects that have been accomplished over the last approximately 10 years then. So we're about halfway through our 20-year plan. And the full project list has 509 major capital projects, including both the financially constrained and unconstrained projects, as well as projects where PBOT is not the lead agency. We've called those partner-led projects. And note that, importantly, the required system-wide inventory process, which is guided through an OAR, it may still identify network gaps and deficiencies in any of these completed project areas, in which case new projects may be scoped to address remaining deficiencies and included within the project prioritization process for the 2045 TSP major capital projects list. Great. So out of the 305 Portland-led financially constrained major capital projects in the 2035 TSP, 124 projects have been completed or are already funded and programmed to be completed before the 2045 TSP is adopted, which is estimated by the end of 2027. So of these projects, 37 are in progress and 87 projects are complete. And this represents 41% of our Portland-led financially constrained projects completed in about the halfway mark here for our 20-year plan. We tagged completed projects by project category, where projects could have multiple tags. They're not exclusive, so if you're like, this definitely doesn't add up to 100, that's why. But as far as safety projects go, 85% of Portland-led completed projects improved safety. This includes projects like improving crossings, projects that reduce speeds, traffic calming, etc. For bicycle projects, 67% of Portland-led completed projects improve or add bicycling facilities. This includes projects like adding bike lanes, adding protection to bike lanes, and improving crossings. And then walking projects, 68% of Portland-led completed projects improve or add pedestrian facilities. This includes projects like sidewalk infill, improving crossings, adding off-street paths. For walking and biking project examples, think of the 136th Avenue bike ped improvements, the 20s bikeway, Blumenauer Bridge, and Capitol Highway corridor improvements. The other category we have is transit supportive projects. So 24% of Portland-led completed projects support transit speed, reliability, and access. These include projects that the City of Portland would have funded to support major projects such as building sidewalks to access to transit, adding transit signal priority, making right turn lanes for use by buses, etc. Think of East Portland Access to Transit, which built sidewalks to access the FX2 line, and the inner Burnside multimodal improvements, which reconfigured lanes to reduce transit delay. And then roadway and freight projects. 52% of Portland-led completed projects improve freight access or make major roadway changes. Some examples are removing the North Willamette Boulevard weight-restricted semi-viaduct, the Going Street, Lombard Street, Grand, and MLK traffic signal technology improvements, St. John's Truck Strategy Phase 2 implementation. I've got more examples. I'm probably forgetting some people's favorite ones here. Maybe the Killingsworth I-205 interchange improvements, among others. In addition to the 124 Portland-led financially constrained projects projected to be completed prior to the adoption of the 2045 TSP, there are also 25 regional projects within the city that have been or will be completed in partnership with other transportation agencies such as TriMet and ODOT over the approximately 10-year period since the 2035 TSP major capital projects list was initially adopted. And the estimated 40% of these completed projects, we've completed 40%, or the partners have completed with our partnership 40%. If that makes sense. Here's some highlights. The I-205 auxiliary lanes, Gideon Street, AKA Bob Stacy pedestrian bike bridge, North Lombard corridor improvements, Outer Powell Boulevard, Powell Division, high capacity transit, or the FX2. Our TSP also has programs, which is another way we accomplish smaller projects in a more nimble way. We've spent $85 million on these types of things programmatically, so that's about 9% of our 2035 TSP's financial plan. And these are the 10 TSP programs that are listed in our plan and in our financial strategy as well. And with that, I can bring us back to a questions break.
I'll call myself. Going back to the 52% of freight, like Portland-led projects increase freight. My assumption is there, and I just want to that's a lower level than the 67% or 68% of bike and ped. My assumption is that most of those freight access projects occur on state facilities, but am I wrong?
Oh, let me clarify.
Thank you.
It's both freight and roadway.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And no, these are counted as Portland-led projects. So these are on our facilities. Partner-led projects, those would be counted under.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking like within the city of Portland, that would be a much higher number, but those are state facilities, and so they are not Portland-led, right? Correct. Would that be a correct? Okay. Other questions? Yeah, Alvarado.
Just curious if there's any data or any something similar to this that talks about perhaps number of projects that address some equity concerns, or there's quite a bit of that on the website. I'm just curious if there's that's something that the city's keeping track of.
Yeah, so I think I guess you're meaning like location particularly, or
location, or
yeah. So I think we do have some analysis on that. It's sort of tricky to some of the actual projects get built are not commensurate exactly with the 20-year corridor description of need, and so locating those, particularly sort of around level investment, is challenging. But yeah, I think we could potentially show the percentage of projects that are that have occurred in different areas, if that would be of interest to the commission. Yeah. It does. On the level of the number of projects, I think we are struggling with how maybe to represent that in other ways, financially, which is often the question that occurs, because it's difficult to maybe always track those through, and so.
Yeah, I think another way to put it is that when we look at like the 2035 financial cost of a project, those were just the planning level estimates. And for this work scope of what we're trying to do, we're literally just needing to make planning level estimates for 2045 in the future and removing the things that got done here. But it doesn't mean that's the actual cost or investment that was made. And so I think further analysis should be done to be able to show maybe overall impact of our transportation investment in Portland.
I think we plan to follow up with that. Thanks.
questions before we move on? Okay, thank you.
Maybe just one tiny aside is like that the 2035 TSP, for example, had 82nd Avenue as like $5 million, but we know that 70 million has already been spent. So it's not a great indicator with that. So, okay, and we're going to talk about the fun stuff now, the vision, goals, and objectives, but you can also feel free to ask other questions as you come to them. I normally like doing the talking about vision, goals, and objectives. I feel like Eric's ended up doing a lot of talking with answering questions. Are you still okay doing this section? Okay.
We can do what our game plan was.
Okay.
so.
Maybe, do I still
Yeah, maybe
want to
if you
just touch on this? Okay, so how about I tell you a bit about the TSP scope and schedule again, just so that I put this into context. The capital project audit we just shared was looking backwards to what we've accomplished, and it was an element of our work plan in the groundwork phase. But also our groundwork phase includes looking forward to what we want to shape and do for the future of our transportation system. And that's through shaping the transportation vision, goals, and objectives we'd like to see for 2045. And the goals we shape for the 2045 TSP will update those currently found in Chapter 9 of the Comprehensive Plan. And both the goals and the objectives will serve our TSP update process in two ways. One, the goals will help inform how we prioritize projects on the TSP's major capital projects list. And two, the goals and objectives will guide how we propose edits using the strike-throughs and underlines for changes and additions to other policies throughout the TSP. So both the proposed changes to the major capital projects list and our transportation policies will ultimately return to the Planning Commission as our 2045 TSP for legislative review and recommendation to City Council in 2027. I think I added some cute things here. So the work we do here shapes what we do here and what will engage the community on and ultimately bring to you in a proposed draft for your public hearing and legislative action in recommending to City Council. Ta-da! So let me tell you how we got to the draft vision and goals and objectives we have so far. In this portion of the presentation, we'll explain how these goals and objectives have been and are continuing to be developed, and we'll ask for feedback from planning commissioners that can help us continue to refine and evolve their direction. Oh, good, I do have more slides. Okay. To help develop our 2045 transportation vision, goals, and objectives, we used an appreciative inquiry approach in our community engagement to help guide us to a motivating future. By identifying and amplifying what works well within our transportation system, rather than just fixating on what's wrong. And in our public survey, to inform our vision, goals, and objectives development, we invited Portlanders to start by thinking about some of the best times they've had getting around Portland or related to our transportation system, then consider what that positive experience might mean about what they deeply value, and finally to consider what it makes them wish for the future of Portland's transportation system. So it's this appreciative inquiry approach basis. And that's just what we asked individuals to tell us. We said, tell us your 3 wishes. Tell us 3 wishes you have for the future of Portland's transportation system. We also gave organizations who provide collective engagement, like neighborhood groups, business associations, and community-based organizations, the opportunity to write us a letter with their 3 wishes. And either way, we asked for each wish to be 350 characters or less, and we provided 3 tips that we described, which included thinking high level, tell us what you want, not what you don't want, and ask why to get to the heart of it. The engagement all took place between July 28th and October 1st. And as we anticipated, all geographies and demographics were not responding to our online survey proportionately. So we stepped up more specific engagement, including outreach at 12 community events, which gathered 480 additional wishes from underrepresented districts and communities. More on that on this slide. This is a breakdown of where our wishes came from. Altogether, we received over 3,000, including about 2,500 wishes from 860 online survey respondents, 42 wishes from 14 letters from organizations, and 480 additional wishes from our outreach at 12 community events. You may notice that the online survey had about a quarter of the respondents from District 2 and a quarter from District 4. So D1 made up just 7% of the survey results. So it would make sense to particularly see event wishes added from our added efforts in District 1, but you also see added event wishes for District 2 and citywide, but not District 4. So to clarify, our additional event efforts had two goals. One was to gain more geographic engagement from District 1. And the other was to expand our demographic engagement. And the D2 events were geared largely towards the latter, and I'll share that in a moment. And District 4 also did a great job engaging through their organizations, providing 5 letters, whereas we didn't receive any letters from organizations in District 2. So as I mentioned, we focused engagement in District 1 due to low survey response rates, which you can see as percentages on the map. The additional events we gathered wishes at included the District 1 People's Picnic, Multicultural Kids Fair, Park Rose High School, Mill Park Grand Opening, and an email to all District 1 schools. We also focused in-person engagement due to low online survey responses from both BIPOC and low-income communities. So in addition to the District 1 events, which also helped us reach our underrepresented demographic communities, we also gathered wishes at El Grito, PDX, Central City Concern, Imani Wellness Fair, and we considered those citywide wishes because of their large draw and regional kind of engagement there. Delta Park Houseless Community, Magnolia Apartments, Affordable Housing Engagement, and Collie Fest. We counted that as D2, which is done intentionally to expand our race and income engagement, and as well as our District 1 events. Of course, many wishes were positions, and some aren't even things our local government agency can control. So it was useful for us to ask ourselves, how might we address the key interests behind the sentiments we heard from the public within our 2045 TSP vision, goals, and objectives engagement? And we want you to hear them too. So here are sentiments across all districts that were key things that all districts had in common. Respondents across all districts emphasized the need for protected bike lanes, well-maintained sidewalks, and safer pedestrian crossings. Vision Zero goals, eliminating traffic deaths, were widely supported, as were calls for more frequent, reliable, and affordable transit service. Many want 24/7 service, better east-west and north-south connections, and real-time arrival information. Fairless transit was a recurring theme, broad support for zero-emission vehicles, electric buses, and reduction of diesel emissions. Many respondents want more trees, green infrastructure, and car-free zones to reduce pollution and urban heat. An emphasis on ADA-compliant infrastructure, safe routes for children and seniors, and transportation options for low-income residents. Calls for investment in underserved areas, especially East Portland. And finally, there was high interest in max tunnels, high-speed rail ferry systems, and bike highways, as well as suggestions for smart traffic signals, congestion pricing, and better integration of modes like bike and transit. When we get into key differences by district, that information can additionally help us update our pattern area sub-policies. Key differences by district. District 1, East Portland, top priorities. Oh, maybe I should caveat here that we did use Microsoft Copilot to help support some of our analysis here, and that's how we're able to also get this tone analysis you'll see there. We weren't just judging people on that. AI supported that. So top priorities: sidewalks, street paving, and basic infrastructure. Unique concerns: gravel roads, lack of bike infrastructure, and poor transit access. Tone: practical and equity focus. Many feel left behind in citywide investments. Key differences from District 2, North Portland. Top priorities: connectivity to downtown and the airport, safer bike routes. Unique concerns: isolation of neighborhoods like Kenton and St. John's. And the tone: aspirational but frustrated with current gaps in transit service. Key differences, District 3, Inner East Side. Top priorities: protected bike lanes, max tunnel, pedestrian plazas. Unique concerns: traffic calming, car-free streets, and climate resilience. Tone: visionary and progressive. Many want Portland to lead nationally. Key differences, District 4, West Side, Southwest Portland. Top priorities: transit expansion, especially to Southwest, safer crossings and max access. Unique concerns: hilly terrain, lack of sidewalks, and poor east-west connections. Tone: focused on connectivity and equity with a strong emphasis on infrastructure gaps. Non-district specific. Top priorities: system-wide improvements, climate action, and regional rail. Unique concerns: big picture ideas like removing freeways, superblocks, and urban design. Tone: strategic and systems oriented, often from professionals or advocates. So we have all this public feedback, and it's one part of the equation to get us to our draft vision, goals, and objectives. Our vision, goals, and objectives legally have to be consistent with our regional transportation plan, comprehensive plan, and the transportation planning rules. So we did a deep dive to cross-compare the requirements, which shaped what we're now calling 4 core goals around access, safety, climate, and equity, which are cross-cuttingly met all the requirements. From there, we integrated feedback from our technical advisory committee and did a 3 wishes activity with our community advisory committee, which shaped what we called 6 interest themes, which were safety and accessibility for everyone, safer, faster, smoother options, supporting community and neighborhood development, a healthy climate and environment for future generations, maintaining our assets, and big moves. Then we integrated our modal plan goals and objectives. We utilized Microsoft Copilot within our own QA/QC or quality control process to integrate these for an initial framework from which we iterated with the results from the wishes, again, utilizing Copilot for AI support. And the draft vision, goals, and objectives then went through additional QA/QC by our project team and with our technical advisory committee, and now with you today. And with our community advisory committee coming up on November 19th, and then with any council committee should we be able to get on their agendas. So let's take a look at where we're at. This is a draft vision statement shaped from the goals and objectives. Portland's transportation system connects people to opportunity and supports a prosperous economy, fosters safe streets and vibrant communities, and advances a just transition to a climate-resilient future. Together, we are building a transportation future that is equitable, joyful, and boldly Portland. We envision a city where everyone, regardless of age, ability, income, or background, can move freely, affordably, and sustainably through a complete multimodal network. Our streets will be places of health, safety, joy, and connection, designed for people first, while also supporting safe and efficient goods movement. Through transparent governance and community partnership, we will invest in infrastructure that repairs past harms, strengthens neighborhoods and businesses, and prepares Portland for the challenges and possibilities of the next 20 years. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric, who will walk us through the goals piece here.
Yeah, turn back on. We've got some cross there. And I know that I think you all received some of these in advance to be able to spend a little more time to inform this. Did also, knowing that we're in public here, want to just try to briefly walk through these and also make sure we're aligned on sort of how the framework is working. So yeah, this is how we're then translating from that top line vision, which really focuses on the kind of ultimate end state and how users experience the system, to then identify goals, which are really more about what we want our transportation system to do, getting a little bit more tangible and turning it into actions and projects that we can take and evaluate. And then we'll step those down even to more specific approaches, which can inform measures of success, and sort of the objectives that frame the work even more directly. So as we, based on all the inputs Francesca just described, what we also see emerging are these sort of two key functions, if you will, almost anchoring goals, in addition to those four core goals of safety and access and equity and climate. But fundamentally, these two functions, first providing access to the things like services and locations that Portlanders need to live happy, fulfilled lives. And we can think of this also as, sorry, that moved to that next slide. We can also think about this as describing this function in terms of managing the city's right-of-way as a conduit, to support that access, really more the flowing, if you will. And then the second key function is creating and supporting a vibrant city. And this reminds us that we're part of the comprehensive plan that's also envisioning that, ensuring that our neighborhoods and our commercial corridors are welcoming and active, and that include things other than using rights-of-way for just moving vehicles as well. And we can, why does it keep moving through there when I'm just going down this? I guess I need to do that, I say. Sorry. Yeah, and that's really thinking about describing this function in terms of managing a city's right-of-way as a place. And one example of this to keep in mind might be the plaza programs that emerged during the pandemic and have become a new feature of our transportation system that brings joy to people and people to businesses in many cases. Now, around each of these key functions, we think we can further organize a related constellation, if you will, of goals that are represented here in blue, encircling each of those key functions to which they kind of most relate. This is how we sort of further unpack this. So for the example of the providing access goal, we can think of how these goals, we think, articulate how we want the system, how that access should be provided. So safely, equitably, healthily, sustainably, and resiliently. And we'll unpack each of these in turn with the objectives in subsequent slides. Sorry, I am struggling with this one. For the vibrant city function, we can think of these goals as articulating what we want the transportation system to create and support, including an economically prosperous city that's built on strong foundations and features great places that people love. So to further unpack these in the constellations, we'll go through each of them. All right. So first on the access side. So including its access itself as a goal. By that, and you'll see the goals sort of up top and then the objectives follow. So by that we mean building, operating, and maintaining a connected multimodal transportation system where everyone in Portland can reach jobs, schools, services, and community destinations they need to thrive. In order to guide how we should achieve each goal, that's where these objectives come in. So you can sort of think of, if you will, as specific strategies or actions we'll take to help us achieve those goals. In this case of access, those objectives would focus on providing those complete connected multimodal networks and services that people have convenient access to, and that they understand how to navigate and reach those places they care about accessing. So how do we sort of think through the whole suite of transportation of the trip making and what they'll need to be able to get there to what they want. In terms of providing access safely, we mean both achieving our Vision Zero goal of eliminating deaths and serious injuries on the transportation system and ensuring personal security and comfort so all users feel welcome across all modes. To do this, we must manage speeds, which are highly correlated with serious injury and death when crashes do occur, and focus our other safety inventions where we're seeing the highest number of injuries and high-risk behaviors, while designing and delivering improvements that make the right-of-way safe for all users, including our most vulnerable. In terms of providing access healthily, we mean both reducing localized air and noise pollution that is shown to harm human health and to support human health through enabling more users to enjoy the benefits of exercise through active transportation, such as biking, walking, rolling, and accessing transit. In terms of approaches, we'll look to a range of design approaches that help minimize or buffer from harms like air pollutants and noise, while also supporting the use of cleaner and quieter modes to minimize the risk of those harms in the first place. And I'll note we also acknowledge the connection between Vision Zero and a healthy transportation system, and you can see that connection there. But we're proposing to call these out separately given the different strategies we employ to advance each of them. Please.
I just want to note, we often talk about active transportation and exercise as the main health benefit, and I think that there's been, more studies that recognize that being out in community physically also and exercise also has a really strong behavioral and mental health process, and that communities that are more walkable, rollable, bikeable are also more connected and more resilient, more inclusive, and as we talk about, our former Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, talks about the loneliness epidemic, that connected communities through active transportation also help us be less lonely as communities. So I know that that's less quantifiable than like beats per minute on exercise, but I think it's important to lift up. Thank you.
I appreciate that, and I think including putting it here, I'll note that I lifted up some of that elsewhere in the sort of the great places and the bringing people together and connecting it. So I think 100%, and important point that's part of what maybe that active transportation does when we get outside of boxes where we can interact some more, if you will, as we move.
Yeah. If you've heard the phrase meaningful inefficiencies, you heard this, like that while you're walking your dog and you're waiting for the light to change, that you get to chat with someone for a few minutes. Meet a neighbor.
Great, thank you. In terms of providing access sustainably, we focus here on reducing greenhouse gas emissions through both decarbonizing transportation, through clean fleets and fuels, and also through land use strategies that reduce the need to drive to access essential needs and make it easier to use low carbon modes due to shorter distances needing to be traversed. And if that concept sounds familiar, it is, because it's very much the approach that's in line with the comprehensive plan around thinking about 20-minute neighborhoods and complete communities. So very much a strong alignment there, which we accomplished through concentrating growth in those centers, the climate-friendly areas we talked about earlier, and the corridors, in order to then make it easier to be using education, encouragement, and other informational support to help folks identify and be able to use the right trip for the right mode. And so I guess just want to note here too, we've talked a lot about vehicle miles traveled and things like that. Our current goals, and this plan will not say no one should drive anywhere ever, right? But when we recognize, for example, that nationally, and this number is the most recent number I've seen is nationally, so I'll cite that. But I understand it's quite similar here, or maybe slightly better. But 52% of trips made in an automobile in America are less than 3 miles. Now, some of those, depending on the trip type, might really need the car, but I bet a number of those probably could be made with some other modes, especially if we make it safe, attractive, and convenient to do so. So that's the opportunity space that we're talking about in many cases here. And great. I also want to acknowledge here, sustainability is a big term, right? And many other concepts can fit within this, such as inequity and economic performance being added to a triple bottom line approach. Also recognizing sustainability probably requires climate resilience or freedom from harm from air pollutants. But we've tried to kind of slice this out and focus on this core piece, given the existential threat of climate change, and capture those other pieces in some other places. So I noted in the health category, for example, and then in the next one on resilience is where we might focus more on that climate resilience, or we are proposing to. So this is where we focus on transportation system that can withstand and quickly recover from natural and human-made shocks, including earthquake and climate change impacts. And this is going to mean working with our asset managers and our risk assessment specialists to prioritize where we strengthen infrastructure first and to incorporate more resilient designs in future projects. We're not only retrofitting, but are building right the first time. It also includes more proactive efforts to reduce the risk of ongoing community harm from increasingly extreme weather, which we also know is not equitably distributed today. For example, by including more tree canopy and other green infrastructure and transportation projects, we can help all Portlanders be better positioned to withstand the worst impacts during events like the heat dome that we know cost many lives here. And certainly not least, as we consider how best to achieve all these other goals, we look across all of them to understand disparities, and this is how we do this equitably, I should note, we understand disparities in the benefits and burdens experienced by different groups of Portlanders, and then ensure that investments, services, and other actions are deployed in ways that seek to eliminate those disparities, so that one's identity is not a predictor of how much and what quality of access a Portlander experiences. This also means prioritizing the needs of those with differing abilities and language proficiencies who too often still experience barriers to access that others enjoy, while also addressing cost barriers that many also experience using the transportation system. In these cases and in others where we're aiming to advance equitable outcomes, it is important that we be informed by those experiencing disparate impacts in developing tailored solutions. Finally, we recognize that past planning and investment has resulted in displacement of residents and businesses in the same places where we're hoping to eliminate disparities, not exacerbate them. As major investments are advanced, we'll work with community partners with the goal of proactively stabilizing the communities where those investments are occurring, such as the collaborative work with the 82nd Avenue Coalition on a development strategy in conjunction with the transformational changes being implemented on the transportation network in that part of the city. So, that is on the providing access installation. There's a few fewer on this other side, so we're almost there, and then look very much forward to our conversation continuing. So as we look then about what it means to support and create a vibrant city, to be economically prosperous, we're recognizing the role of the transportation system in both improving job access and supporting local businesses and goods movements, but also how crucial the transportation system is in supporting the city's economic development strategy, as we noted earlier. Particular strategies and actions here include improving business and freight operations through system design and management that responds to their needs while minimizing harms to neighboring communities. And it also means working with public and private partners to leverage opportunities presented in conjunction with investment in, for example, our tax increment finite districts or additional local improvement districts, and the jobs and housing opportunities presented in other major investments like the Montgomery Park streetcar that I know this group approved zoning changes for with new jobs and housing development opportunities. Finally, it means continuing to expand job opportunities related to building, operating, and maintaining the city's transportation system itself, recognizing a major amount of investment flows through that, and those are often good trade jobs that are available there as well. But the city's rights-of-way are not just a place for moving vehicles or people. They're also where much of the city concentrates other utility infrastructure that's essential to modern society's function, such as water, power, and telecommunications, a public works service area, for example, if you will. And that's where they're co-located, and thus our rights-of-way also need to be built and maintained to support those functions. To achieve this, we'll integrate broader consideration of asset management needs as we prioritize and make system improvements informed by risk and criticality considerations there. And as the city's new form of government focuses on even stronger coordination among service areas, we'll work to jointly identify opportunities for investment and shared understanding of risk with our other public works partners through the unified capital improvement process currently underway, as we noted earlier. And our streets, as we noted, are also not just for moving vehicles or people or the needed infrastructure. They really cover a substantial portion of the city's total land area, so they can and should be great places where people want to gather and that support social vibrancy and economic activity. And as the chair noted, other connection and perhaps public health benefits from that as well. To support more of this type of experience, we can both create more places that invite people in with art and greenery, activities, while being thoughtful about where locating these places can best balance against any harmful potential impacts to the conduit function of providing access to the system as well, while also making sure that they're available across the city. So much of this work can be done along corridors as well, providing a joyful experience throughout a journey in addition to being a destination in its own right. So again, to your note. So that is how we've sort of continued to structure down the goals and associated objectives, and that's how all the pieces come back together again in the constellation. And we look forward to hearing your thoughts and reactions.
Yeah, and I guess just one note here. The eventual vision goals and objectives will look different because we are going to engage our community advisory committee in a pretty cool workshop type design. Haven't sent out that agenda yet, but looking forward to what we're going to do with our community advisory committee to continue to shape these and in using your feedback and ideas and thoughts as well.
Thank you so much. Questions, thoughts? Yeah, Commissioner Knowles.
Well, really good job. Thank you very much. Remind us when we next engage in this process.
When would you like us? Because we would like to come. We're currently planning to come for your legislative action in 2027, but we would love to come in the development phase should you invite us. And that would be sometime next year where we could give an update of how we are applying this work to our policy reviews and to prioritizing that major capital projects list.
I think that would be helpful, particularly if, as we might hope, there's a different funding scenario than we know of right now. Might be, if that occurs, that might be a good time to come visit with us.
Indeed.
Commissioners, Patricia Diefenhofer. Sorry, I was just going to say that we're happy to continue to work with our PBOC colleagues to identify another time when it would be appropriate to give another update. I think it's fair to consider an update in the development phase, and we're happy to do that. I don't know that we know what the timing of that is at this point, but thank you.
Future is uncertain. Great.
Yeah, we're happy to work with the chair as liaison to our community advisory committee effort and the process overall to think through when that would be most meaningful as you see that unfold.
Challenge accepted. Great. It was interesting because we're I think fairly well represented by district, and to see people nodding by district, like Commissioner Brandon and I, yeah, we're like D1, yep.
Well, since you brought up districts, I'm in District 3, and I live in the Brentwood-Darlington neighborhood. And I had a question regarding, I'm not quite sure where this falls. I think it's under either resilience or one of the last points you made around just ongoing maintenance. And often that maintenance is not as exciting as the new stuff, right? But I was thinking about, we have a neighborhood Greenway in Brentwood-Darlington on Ogden. And recently a neighbor invited me to go out and do a street audit of it because she's a skateboarder and a bicyclist and neighborhood volunteer. And as I was on it and my son was on a scooter and I'm walking, it became just so evident that the quality of the pavement was really compromised. And so I did reach out to PBOT staff and I got a great response. But of course, we did the project. We don't have any more funding. Thank you for your input. So I'm wondering where those types of it's a completed project, but it's not quite meeting its full potential, right? Because there might be just a little bit more needed.
Yeah, no, thank you for the example. I think at least a couple thoughts. One, traditionally the transportation system plan is really focused on those new things and growth management, right? It's part of the land use planning rules of the state and hasn't really encouraged a lot of asset management consideration, frankly. We are feeling that's important, especially in a city that is well behind in maintenance backlogs and that council has also recognized. And so we are working actively with our asset manager to understand how we can bring more of that information into opportunities to make asset condition improvements at the same time as we're making other system improvements, particularly around bridges and some of the seismic connection, but also the pavement condition index that we use and understanding that. And hopefully some folks have experienced some of what we call pave and paint types of approaches, which can advance both of those. So I think really looking for those win-win types of opportunities is something we're trying to do more and more in this. And then we'll also, you may have been noting that council has put some strong focus on asset management and we'll want to integrate with a strategic asset management plan that probably gets a little deeper into that, but how do we understand the relationship to that as that gets underway as well. And then as I noted, right, we're putting only about a quarter of the money out there, not to say all that goes into asset management, but I think trying to keep an eye and talk about the overall mix of what's appropriate to do that. And then to your other point, I think we would be looking at some of that information to see if there's additional need in that space, and how do we also be thoughtful about where we're making other improvements if the underlying condition of the street may not support use of it, as I hear you suggesting. So I think those are some additional learning opportunities.
Yeah, Commissioner Pollack.
I was just kind of more just curious on the priority given to District 1. And when we went to their top concerns, they definitely stood out, particular to me, as it was more asking for sort of what I think a lot of us would take for granted as like bare bones infrastructure that a city would provide, while my own district, District 3, and others kind of were looking more towards, wishes for what they want, for what could be attained. I just was curious if there's going to be a lot of focus on kind of those like basic needs being fulfilled for District 1 so they can go on further in what they would like.
That is such a good point, and I think we'll need to look at that and try to make sure that we're doing due diligence and doing right by the feedback that we received. And so I would say we stay tuned in how we can try to accomplish that in our development phase as we continue to utilize the public feedback that we received as a reservoir to shape how we're doing our work. So it's not just that vision, goals, and objectives. It's also looking at it, what we learned overall that were the key differences. I think that's a good point. Was there anything else you?
I think I'd just add that the process itself, I think, will lift that up because there's even more kind of robust requirements around really looking at gaps and deficiencies and needs in there. And so I think as we're really looking at, and that's part of those original components that are informing some of those project lists and the evaluation criteria and how we have to show overall the benefits and burdens in the mix. That's part of what the entire package has to do. So I think even though that's very much in line with the city's values and what we've been trying to do, and I think have done demonstrably more so over time, that will be a key focus of this and future updates under the new rules as well.
Yeah, we're not going to be able to spend all the budget on some big moves and not do the things that are important to people in D1 or other districts, yeah.
And hopefully it connects with some of those other conversations with council we were talking about around how do we go ahead and fund those things, which is of course a challenge as well, given disinvestment.
And I just think that this is just one part of many plans and many processes. And sometimes when these bonds come up for us to vote on them, providing a level of service that is equitable to every part of Portland should be the goal. And so you mentioned all this visionary stuff in some of these other districts. It's very clear that like we are not meeting that minimum level of of service as a city for certain districts. And it's continuing to be District 1, and I am biased as my district, but I also saw District 2, my former district, asking for certain things as well. But this is just one part of the process. We get to ask all these questions in this space, but I know when things come up to vote, people are hesitant about, oh, that's more taxes, but there's not a lot of great bonds presently that I know that cover maintenance. It's really big for big, large, new capital projects. You can look at the Parks Bureau's backlog of asset management and know that things are not prioritized properly right now. We need to find ways to fund that, and I hope anyone watching this can be excited about maintenance as well, so we can maintain and have, enjoy the things we already have.
So,
I hear that in like the love the one you're with kind of. I really appreciate Commissioner Spivak's, I'll call him myself, Commissioner Spivak's around like a dashboarding, like, you know, how it started, how it's going. Because I do think, you know, assessing and recalibrating, because we're seeing, you know, to the point of maintenance, for example, you know, things like our rapidly changing climate is impacting, you know, when something is patched, it really impacts, you know, how the acceleration of a road failure, right? Like that those extreme cold and extreme heat stresses our infrastructure, stresses our pavement, such that that it accelerates some of those maintenance issues, as does, you know, our use of studded tires, which people use even more when there are extreme weather events. That electric vehicles, I'm just going to pull down what I think about a lot. Like electric vehicles tend to be much heavier, and so that has a greater strain. And because gas tax continues to be our main source of revenue, and we have not, you know, found a way to recalibrate it, that there's, you know, greater. We talk about like why do we keep coming back on why are we raising this gas tax? And it's like, well, in part, you know, there is this disparity. Like on one hand, it's really important that we have more efficient vehicles. The bicycle is the most efficient vehicle, but on the other hand, that we're causing greater concentration of revenue assumption on gas vehicles because of the gas tax, because we have not found that replacement. And so like I don't envy you the financial review, but I think it's important, you know, as we're dashboarding, to also include like, where is this coming from? What are the potential inputs, and how are we as policies going to shift how we're navigating those assets at a behavioral level to allow for to get us to a place where our maintenance goals are what am I trying to say? A little more realistic in ways that we can't currently predict. We can't predict what we're going to be doing in 5 years. We can hope. Blah. Okay, great. Anyone who comes after me is going to sound very eloquent.
It's been a long day. I can't make any promises. I had a question about the resiliency category. I was surprised to not see anything specifically related to seismic within that, and the ability of our infrastructure to withstand an earthquake, and also from like a emergency response standpoint.
Okay, great, thank you.
I thought I guess did note that, so I agree.
We'll take a look and we'll double check.
Yes.
Was it? I thought there were two little branches, and there was
I think we
like
tried to describe those as withstanding. Sort of the goal, I think, articulates natural and human-made, sort of primarily seismic and climate change impacts, and then trying to design the infrastructure to withstand either of those. So, but absolutely, I'll be at a workshop for our emergency transportation routes regionally in a week or two at Metro. So we're definitely thinking about that as well, and would be bringing that in as we think about prioritization and making sure that those are resilient routes as well.
Well,
so.
And I take a little different approach in that I just want to make sure that we
make it very clear.
look back at this and honor what you've shared and make sure that it is showing up here. So thank you for that feedback.
It's totally possible I missed it too.
We
There
will
were a
make
lot of
sure.
words on the slides,
There's
but I
so
was
many
looking at
words.
it and I didn't hear it for whatever that's worth.
That is worth noting how we should communicate.
They should definitely show up clearly.
It might have been verbal, because I think I remember reference, but yeah, I'm not seeing it on the slide either.
Very helpful. We'll
Yeah.
make sure that's reflected.
Are there questions, reflections?
Other things that are just important to you that whether or not we said them, you want to make sure are said
Does anyone
in
want to
all the words
advocate,
that we have?
to advocate for a municipal trebuchet or a funicular? No? Do you say maintenance bot? Oh. Oh. Great. Well, Eric, thank you for the question. Hessa and Francesca, it's not a mode, it's a system. Jones, thank you very much for being here. We're looking forward to finding a time for a follow-up briefing and conversation during the development phase, but very grateful for your time.
We're really grateful for your time. Thank you for hanging in there through our whole presentation. I hope this whets your appetite for cookies, pie, and more TSP. And so we look forward to engaging with you more. If you would like to follow up to ask any additional questions that come to you later or share other things, we make ourselves available.
And I will say that the Community Advisory Committee meetings are also, as this would suggest, very delicious. So if you need to come, there is pizza. And for the icebreaker, when you come back, we will need to talk about what our favorite desserts are.
Maybe we should have cookies when you're back, because I don't want to see them on the screen and not eat one. Apologies.
It's hard. Okay. Thank you. And with that, we will not be meeting next month, but we will be meeting furiously and often thereafter. So please rest up. Thank you so much, everyone. And with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
I don't know if I like the evening. It's like I got to leave class a little early. I got to go home earlier. I like it a lot better. I get 2 hours to myself by the time I get home. 2 hours to myself for 20 home, really, but. It's always fun to do that. I go back and you're like, are you trying to get like a score? Once no, so I get off on it being like, what's official? Mr. Ball. I'm just a guy. Like, you know.
It does take a while to get used to that. Yeah. Way to propose a first.
Something I forgot exactly how much. 60. Yeah. I was trying to think of. Right. I don't know that person. I definitely also saw some transit that's overrepresented. Oh, underground tunnels.